Chapter 1. The Unremarkable. He knelt among the gnarled roots at the edge of Hallows Field, carefully clipping a cluster of dust-colored flowers known as nightwort. The last light of evening cast long shadows across the overgrown plain, where ancient helmets and broken spearheads jutted from the earth like the grasping hands of forgotten corpses. Zanzibar exhaled slowly, steadying his trembling fingers as he placed the precious herbs into his leather satchel. He hated lingering here after sundown. Hallows Field was a scar on the land, a desolate expanse where hundreds had died in a battle years before he was born. Locals claimed restless spirits still wandered the field at night, and as darkness crept in, Zans did not entirely doubt it. A chill wind sighed through the tall grasses, sounding unnervingly like a low moan. Zans tugged his threadbare cloak tighter around his thin shoulders. At 17 years old, he was slight and wiry, more bone than muscle, after years of sparse meals and long days working for the village alchemist. In the fading light, his reflection in a puddle looked ghost-pale and ragged, hardly a fearsome figure. If any spirits were watching, they likely felt sorry for him. With a self-deprecating smirk, he murmured to the emptiness, "Don't worry, I'm leaving. No sense haunting a fellow who's half a ghost himself, eh?" His attempt at humor echoed flatly. Zan stood, knees protesting after hours crouching in the dirt. Master Ormond had sent him at noon to gather nightwort and belladonna from this forsaken place, and as usual, the old man's errands had run late. Still, Ormond's remedies saved lives in Greybrook, the nearby village, and nightwort was a key ingredient in his plague draughts. A little risk and discomfort were part of the apprenticeship. Ormond often reminded Zans that knowledge blooms best in the shadows. Usually that wisdom earned a groan from Zans, but tonight those words felt ominously literal. As he picked his way back toward the dirt road, Zans kept a wary eye on the tree line of the forest beyond the field. Gnarled oaks twisted skyward, their bare branches clawing at the moonless sky. Everyone in Greybrook knew to avoid those woods after dark. Travelers whispered of beasts, and worse lurking under the boughs. Last month, a hunter had vanished there, leaving behind only a splatter of blood on the leaves. Zans quickened his pace, boots crunching on dry grass and brittle bone fragments alike. The quicker he returned to the village palisade, the better. At the old wooden gate of Greybrook, 2 watchmen loitered with spears in hand. Or rather, one stood alert while the other dozed against the fence. The alert guard, Harvin, spotted Zans emerging from the twilight gloom and let out a derisive chuckle. "Well, if it isn't Master Ormond's little shadow creeping back," Harvin called out. He was a broad man with a beer belly and a permanent scowl, and he enjoyed needling the young apprentice. "You find any ghosts out there, grave rat?" Zan sighed and approached, holding up his satchel slightly. "No ghosts, just herbs. Master Ormond needs these fresh." One Harvin stepped in Zans's path, his bulk blocking the gate. The stench of onion and ale wafted from the man's stained tunic. "Out in Hallows Field this late? Either you're braver than you look, or just foolish. Place isn't safe, boy. If the spirits didn't get you, bandits might have. Not that they'd find much to steal off a scrawny whelp like you." The other guard snorted awake briefly. "Let him in, Harv," he muttered, before lolling back to sleep. Zans mustered a thin smile. "Lucky for me, the bandits have higher value targets than an underfed apprentice." Harvin's piggish eyes narrowed. He clearly didn't appreciate wit from someone he saw as beneath him. Watch that tongue. You may play with potions and dead frogs for Ormond, but in a real fight, you'd be as useful as a broomstick. He jabbed a thick finger at Zans's chest for emphasis. Zans stumbled back a step, cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I know. That's why we have capable men like you guarding us," he replied, forcing politeness and swallowing the urge to snap back. A sharp retort would only earn him a cuff to the ear. Harvin smirked, apparently satisfied. He finally stepped aside and unlatched the gate. "That we do. Now get along home, boy, and tell your master to stop sending you outside the walls so late. Not everyone's as lucky as you." There was a strange tone in the guard's voice, almost concern, but Harvin quickly covered it with a grunt. "I will," Zans nodded, slipping through the gate. He walked into Greybrook's dirt streets, lit by a few flickering torches and the soft glow from cottage windows. Behind him, he heard Harvin mutter to his partner, "Kid's gonna get himself killed one of these days." Zans pretended not to hear. Graybrook was a small village, just a scatter of homes with thatched roofs, an inn that also served as the tavern, a smithy, and Master Ormond's apothecary shop, which doubled as Zans's home. It wasn't much, but it was the only home he remembered. Ormond had taken Zans in 6 years ago, a half-starved orphan from the last outbreak of red fever. In exchange for cooking, cleaning, and running errands, Zans learned letters, basic alchemy, and whatever odd bits of knowledge Ormond felt inclined to share. Most villagers respected Ormond for his cures, but they eyed Zans with suspicion. An orphan boy dabbling in strange brews was an easy target for gossip and occasional cruelty. As Zans hurried past the tavern, he kept his head down. Even so, he caught a sneer from Garrick, the blacksmith's son, who lounged outside with a mug in hand. "Oi, alchemist's whelp!" Garrick called. He was red-cheeked with drink, and his cronies snickered on either side of him. "Mix any love potions lately? Maybe something to give you a muscle or two?" One of Garrick's friends jeered. "He's already half ghost pale. Maybe the necromancer's horde will think he's one of them and pass him by." The group roared with laughter at that morbid joke. War rumors had clearly been circulating. Two Zans flushed but didn't stop. He knew better than to engage. Garrick had 2 stone and a half on him, all muscle. Instead, Zans raised a hand in a mock-friendly wave without turning around. "Not tonight, but I'll be sure to brew a charm against obnoxious oafs. There's clearly a need," he said lightly, quickening his pace before Garrick's ale-soaked brain processed the jab. He heard an irritated shout from the group, but he was already ducking around the corner onto the lane that led to Ormond's shop. A hint of a smirk played on his lips. Petty as it was, getting the last word in, even quietly, felt like a small victory. The apothecary shop sat slightly apart from the other buildings, under the drooping branches of a great willow tree. Zans pushed open the wooden door and stepped into the familiar aroma of dried herbs, chemical tinctures, and a faint underlying scent of decay. By the light of a single oil lamp, he could make out the cramped interior, shelves overflowing with jars of powders and unguents, bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, and the large work table strewn with mortar, pestle, and alembics. "Close the door, boy." "Were you raised in a barn?" came a rasping voice from the back room. Master Ormond emerged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was a short, stout man with wispy white hair that formed a halo around his balding pate. His eyes were sharp, glinting like a raven's in his weathered face. "Sorry, master." Zans apologized softly as he shut the door firmly. He handed over the satchel. "I got the nightwort and belladonna you asked for. It took a while to find enough." Ormond peered into the bag and grunted in approval. "Good. I'll need every sprig. The cough spreading among the miller's children and half the town besides. If it turns to red fever." He shook his head, and Zans didn't need him to finish the thought. They both knew how quickly that plague could turn fatal. It had taken Zans's own parents. "I can start grinding the dried root for the fever tonic," Zans offered, eager to be useful. The day had been long, but if more work would stave off an outbreak, he'd do it. But Ormond waved a hand. "In the morning. It's late, and you look about to keel over, lad." The old man's gruffness softened slightly as he added, "You did well today. Hallows Field isn't a place I'd send you if there were any other choice. Nasty business out there." Zans nodded, hesitant. "Master, you've told me about the battle before, but tonight it felt, I don't know, as if something was watching." He immediately felt silly voicing it, expecting Ormond to chuckle and tease him for jumping at shadows. Instead, Ormond grew very still. "Did it now?" he said quietly. His gaze drifted to the small window, through which nothing could be seen but darkness. For a moment, the only sound was the soft bubbling of a cooling potion on the hearth. After a pause, Ormond cleared his throat. "Probably your mind playing tricks. Hallows Field holds a lot of pain in the soil. Sometimes that lingers." He turned away, but not before Zans caught a troubled frown on his face. "Lock up the shutters and get some rest. We'll have much to do come dawn." 3 Zans hesitated, wanting to ask more. Had Ormond ever felt watched out there? But the wariness in his bones made itself known. "Yes, master. Good night." He moved to the front window, barring it and drawing the thick curtains. "Good night, Zans," Ormond replied, busying himself at the work table with the herbs. Zans climbed the narrow ladder to the loft above the shop, which served as his bedroom. It was little more than a low attic space with a straw mattress, but he didn't mind. He dropped onto his bed with a groan, his legs aching. The autumn night air was cool, and he pulled a thin blanket over himself. Below, he could faintly hear Ormond grinding something with the mortar, the rhythm oddly comforting. Staring up at the shadowy rafters, Zans let his mind drift. He thought of Harvin's words at the gate, "Kid's gonna get himself killed," and Garrick's jeers. A familiar bitterness welled up. They all saw him as weak, a nobody. A part of him feared they were right. He wasn't a fighter or a hero. If trouble ever came to Graybrook, what could he do? Throw pepper powder and stink potions at the enemy? The image almost drew a chuckle. Almost. Instead, Zan sighed. Perhaps he'd never impress anyone in Graybrook, no matter how hard he worked. But Ormond believed in him at least. That was something. His eyes grew heavy as he listened to the distant hoot of an owl and the soft crackle of coals in the hearth below. He was just starting to slip into a dream when, boom! A distant explosion rattled the shutters and jolted Zan's upright. His heart pounded as he blinked blearily. What was that? He scrambled off the mattress and moved to the small loft window, peeling back the curtain to peer outside. Across the dark horizon beyond the village, a faint orange glow was blossoming. Fire! Another thunderous boom echoed, followed by a chorus of screams carried on the night wind. Zan's blood turned to ice. That came from the direction of the town gates. Shouts now, and the unmistakable clanging of the alarm bell began to ring frantically. Graybrook was under attack. Chapter 2. Night of Ash and Blood. Zans burst out of the shop behind Ormond, and the village he had known all his life had become a nightmare. The night air was thick with the stench of smoke and charred wood. An orange glow painted dancing shadows on the dirt road as flames leapt from a thatched roof nearby. Screams pierced the darkness, mingling with the low, guttural moans of things that should not be. At the center of Graybrook's main lane, chaos reigned. Villagers ran in every direction, some carrying children, others clutching makeshift weapons, or simply covering their heads. Zan saw Harvin, the gate foreguard, frantically swinging his spear at a shambling figure that lurched toward him. The attacker was once human, but now was a horror. A corpse with slack gray skin hanging off its bones, its eyes milky white and glowing faintly in the firelight. A chunk of its cheek was missing, and as it lunged, it emitted a wet, hungry groan. Harvin speared the creature through the chest, but it hardly slowed. With a snarl, the undead soldier, for Zans now recognized the rusted armor on its form, clawed at Harvin's face. The guard fell with a howl, and the thing fell upon him, teeth gnashing. Zan staggered back at the sight, bile rising in his throat. The smell hit him next, a revolting cocktail of rot, blood, and something fouler, like meat left to fester in a swamp. He gagged, clapping a hand over his nose. This can't be real, some part of him thought, but the screams and the heat of burning timbers were all too real. Zans! Focus! Ormond's voice cut through the panic. The old man stood firm in the street, gripping his wooden staff. His other hand was already in motion, flinging a small clay vial toward two shadows shuffling out from an alley. The vial shattered at the feet of the shapes, who Zans now saw were once the baker and his wife, their dead eyes staring vacantly. Upon breaking, the vial released a burst of hissing green vapor. The undead couple stumbled, flesh sizzling as the alchemical acid ate into them. They collapsed with hideous shrieks. Ormond didn't pause. He dragged Zans by the elbow. Keep moving, boy, he barked, eyes scanning the street. Head for the inn. Anyone still alive might be sheltering there. Zans forced his legs to work, heart hammering. The inn lay further up the road, past clusters of fighting. As they pressed forward, Zans fumbled to open the satchel Ormond had given him. Inside, he felt glass vials and packets. Emergency supplies. What had Ormond packed? His mind raced, trying to recall his training by candlelight. Which powders blinded, which mixtures burned. A terrified scream erupted to their left. Zans whipped his head around. Near the smithy, Garrick, the blacksmith's burly son who had taunted Zans not an hour ago, was swinging a heavy hammer wildly at a horde of corpses advancing on him. 3 of the creatures were already down at his feet. Skulls caved in, but more kept coming. Garrick's face was splattered with gore and panic. Before Zans could react, a blur of movement barreled past him. It was Ormond, surprisingly swift, rushing to intervene. The old apothecary thrust his staff forward and spoke an incantation that Zans didn't recognize, the words harsh and echoing unnaturally. The tip of Ormond's staff glowed faintly purple, and a wave of force slammed into the undead around Garrick, sending them reeling. Garrick, wide-eyed and panting, took the opportunity to smash the nearest monster's skull in. He didn't seem to question the source of the mysterious force that aided him. Ormond beckoned Garrick urgently. "To the inn, you fool! Regroup with others," he commanded. Garrick nodded dumbly and staggered in that direction, half dragging his injured father, who suddenly appeared from behind the smithy's wrecked door. Zan stared at Ormond. That incantation, he had never heard Ormond invoke any spells before. The old man's knowledge had always seemed rooted strictly in herbs and potions. But there was no time to ask. Another crash rocked the ground, and from the corner of his eye, Zan saw the village's front gate finally give way. A section of the wooden palisade exploded inward as a massive shape forced through. Lumber and iron 5 hinges flew like shrapnel. Through the gap shambled more figures, a dozen at least, silhouetted against the darkness beyond. At their head was a towering monstrosity that might have once been an ogre in life. Now its mottled flesh was stitched with crude thread, and spikes jutted from its shoulders. It held a tree trunk like a battering ram. With a bellowing roar, the creature swatted aside the remaining gate timbers and trudged into Greybrook, leading the horde. "Gods preserve us," Zans breathed. The undead ogre's roar resonated in his chest like thunder. The dozen smaller undead behind it fanned out, some breaking into a lurching run toward the panicked villagers. Ormond's face was set in grim determination. "Zans, listen carefully," he said in a low, urgent tone. "Get to the inn. There's a cellar hidden under the back room. You know it. Get anyone you can down there and bar it from inside. Go." Zans's eyes widened. "Master, I can't just leave you." "You can and you must," Ormond snapped, shoving the satchel more securely at Zans. "I'll hold them off as long as I'm able. Now go. That's an order." A wave of anguish washed over Zans. Leave Ormond alone out here? He opened his mouth to protest again, but then he saw beyond his mentor's shoulder. The ogre was charging their way, several undead trailing in its wake. Ormond raised his staff, jaw clenched. There was no time. "I'll come back for you," Zans choked out, hoping it wasn't a lie. Then he turned and sprinted towards the inn. The village inn, the Weary Traveler, stood 2 stories tall and had so far avoided catching fire. Its door was open, and a few villagers were already inside, calling frantically for others. Zans dashed through the doorway into the common room. The smell of spilled ale mingled with sweat and fear. He spotted the innkeeper's wife trying to comfort a crying child under a table. 2 old men were pushing barrels against the windows as an impromptu barricade. "Everyone, to the back!" Zans shouted, surprised by how authoritative his voice sounded amid the chaos. "There's a root cellar below the kitchen. We can hide there." A few heads turned his way in confusion, as he was hardly known as a leader. Zans rushed to the kitchen door himself, beckoning. "This way, hurry!" A young woman carrying an injured boy limped toward him. Zans recognized her as Mara, the miller's eldest daughter. "Cellar?" she asked, eyes wide with desperation. Zans nodded quickly. He helped her into the kitchen. The root cellar entrance was a hatch in the floor. He threw it open, revealing a ladder down into darkness. "Everyone down here!" he called. The innkeeper's wife ushered the child she held toward the kitchen. The old men followed, one supporting the other. In total, perhaps 7 or 8 villagers made their way into the cramped cellar, fear driving them like cattle into a pen. 6 Zans was about to descend last when a sound froze him, the heavy thumping footsteps of the ogre outside, approaching the inn. The floorboards vibrated with each stomp. A moment later, a massive, malformed face loomed in one of the front windows, the creature's single remaining eye glinting under a horned helmet. With a snarl, it shoved against the window frame. Wood splintered and the whole wall shuddered. The inn wouldn't hold long against that thing. He had to buy them time. Zans fumbled in Ormond's satchel, fingers closing around a spherical glass flask wrapped in protective wicker. He had seen these before. Ormond's incendiary bombs made of thick glass filled with a mix of oils and powders. With shaking hands, Zans lit the fuse using a candle stub on the counter. The fuse sparked to life with a fizzle. "Zans, come on!" Mara hissed from below, but he held up a hand. Get the hatch closed after me, he said. Clutching the fizzing firebomb, he crept back into the common room. The ogre was halfway through the wall now, one clawed arm and shoulder forced inside. Its tombstone-sized teeth gnashed as it tried to squeeze in, and a spray of spittle flecked the floor. Thick and dark drool that hissed where it landed, as if even its saliva was foul. Zans gagged at the sour stench of rot rolling off the creature. He forced himself closer, heart slamming against his ribs. Just a few more steps. He could hear the monster's labored, guttural breathing, see the cloudy film over its one good eye. With a cry that was half terror, half resolve, Zans hurled the bomb. His aim was true. The flask sailed into the creature's hideous open maw. There was a shattering of glass, and then a whoosh as flames erupted inside the ogre's throat and skull. The beast reared back from the window, choking on fire. Flames poured from its mouth and nostrils, and a muffled explosion sent bits of charred flesh and bone spraying. The ogre collapsed backwards out of view, thrashing as its head and upper body were engulfed. A bellow of agony rattled the night, tapering off into a wet gurgle. Zans allowed himself one breath of relief. It worked. But any triumph was short-lived. Through the destroyed front wall, more undead were clambering over the ogre's twitching remains, drawn by the commotion. At least 4 walking corpses, and behind them, a skeleton with eerie pinpoints of green light in its eye sockets advanced toward the inn's gaping entrance. Zan stumbled back toward the kitchen. "Down! Down!" he shouted to those in the cellar. Mara had remained at the hatch, watching him. Now she grabbed his arm. "Come on," she urged. He pushed her toward the ladder. "Go, I'll cover." Before he could finish, the leading zombie lunged into the common room, remarkably fast. It was a woman in a tattered dress, half her face burned away. She moved with feral speed, swiping at Zans with claw-like 7 fingers. He yelped and ducked, narrowly avoiding having his eyes gouged out. Off balance, he tripped over a fallen chair and went sprawling. The zombie woman loomed, jaws snapping. Zans frantically kicked at her legs from the floor, slowing her only a second. Cold dread filled him as he saw 2 more undead climbing in behind her and heard the clatter of the skeleton's bones as it stepped over the smoldering ogre corpse. Suddenly, a thunderous crack split the air. A bolt of bright, crackling energy struck the zombie woman in the side, blasting her into the far wall. Zan shielded his face as splinters flew. The zombie slumped, smoking and still. Through the ruined doorway strode Ormond, panting and with a cut on his forehead, but very much alive. His outstretched hand crackled with residual magic, and his eyes, Zans had never seen such intensity in them. Ormond had just cast a lightning spell, Zans realized in amazement. But there was no time to celebrate. The other undead were already turning toward this new threat. Ormond planted himself as a barrier between Zans and the intruders. "Seal the cellar now," he barked without looking back. Mara had already disappeared down the hatch to safety. Zans scrambled to his feet, determination flaring. He couldn't run and hide while Ormond fought alone. He grabbed another item from the satchel, a pouch of fine silver dust used for purifying toxins. It wasn't a weapon, but he knew silver was an anathema to some dark creatures. The skeleton lunged at Ormond with a rusted sword. Ormond parried with his wooden staff. The wood rang against metal as if the staff were steel. The old apothecary was holding his own, twirling the staff with unexpected skill. He caught the skeleton in the rib cage with a heavy swing, knocking it to pieces, but 2 zombies flanked him from either side with animalistic growls. Zans mustered his courage and darted forward, flinging the silver dust at the nearest ghoul. The powder billowed out, catching the creature in the face. It hissed and recoiled as the silver burned into its decayed flesh like acid. "Attaboy," Ormond grunted, seizing the moment to sweep his staff low and take the legs out from under the second zombie. He then drove the butt of the staff through its skull with a sickening crunch. For a heartbeat, it seemed they had cleared the immediate danger. The inn was now filled with the stench of burnt ogre and the remains of the dispatched undead. Zans coughed, sweat trickling down his face, and looked to Ormond, who leaned heavily on his staff. A high-pitched scream from outside cut through the crackle of fires. Zans' stomach clenched. More people were still out there. Through the ruined wall, he could see shapes fleeing and figures giving chase in the flickering light. Ormond saw it too. The old man closed his eyes briefly, anguish etched in the lines of his face. Too many. We can't save them all, he whispered. Zans moved to his side. Master, in the square. His voice died as his gaze fell upon a body lying in the street just beyond the inn. It was Harvin, the guard, unmistakable in his bloody tunic. He lay unmoving, one arm grotesquely twisted. Over him crouched another undead, gnawing at the flesh of Harvin's neck. Bile surged in Zans's throat at the grisly sight. Before he knew what he was doing, Zans had broken into a run toward the square. Zans, stop! Ormond shouted behind him, but Zans's ears roared with fury and horror. Harvin might have taunted him, but he didn't deserve such an end. No one did. Zans skidded to a halt a few paces from Harvin's corpse. The ghoulish thing feasting on the guard looked up, a ragged flap of Harvin's skin hanging from its lip. It was a freshly turned undead, perhaps one of Graybrook's own risen, judging by the farmer's garb and the familiar face contorted in undeath. Its eyes glowed green as it hissed at Zans, blood drooling from its mouth. Rage and disgust overcame fear. Zans grabbed a fallen hoe lying nearby, some villager's abandoned weapon, and swung it with a desperate yell. The metal edge of the hoe blade embedded itself into the ghoul's skull with a dull thunk. The creature shuddered and collapsed atop Harvin's body, finally still. Chest heaving, Zans yanked the hoe free, his hands trembling. The adrenaline of anger ebbed, replaced by the icy realization that he'd just killed, or re-killed, someone he might have known. A chorus of snarls snapped him out of it. 3 more of the undead were staggering toward him from the open gate, drawn by the sound of his shout or the fresh kill. Zans backed up, the hoe slick with gore in his hands. Too many. He glanced over his shoulder for Ormond. His master was running towards him, but even as Zans saw him, he also noticed another figure lurching from the side, a corpse in a soldier's armor, likely one of the old battle dead from Hallows Field. It was closing in on Ormond's blind side, a jagged spear tip jabbing forward. Master, look out! Zans cried. Ormond was quick. He spun and knocked the thrust aside. But the motion left him open for a second, and in that second, another undead, a lanky, rotted thing missing an arm, sprang at him from the other side. The creature's bony fingers raked across Ormond's torso, tearing into flesh. Ormond grimaced, slamming his staff into the attacker's head, but the damage was done. He staggered, pressing a hand to the deep gashes now oozing blood through his shirt. No, Zans shouted, abandoning caution. He sprinted back towards Ormond. The 3 undead that had been advancing on Zans changed course, shambling after him with feral moans. Ormond fell to one knee, still fighting to keep the creatures at bay. He managed to draw a small dagger from his belt and impale the nearest zombie in the eye socket, but he was moving slower, pained. 9 Zans reached his master just as the remaining 2 undead converged on them. He swung the hoe wildly, catching one in the shoulder and knocking it off balance. The third, however, ducked past the swing. It lunged at Zans, and before he could bring the hoe around, it crashed into him. They fell hard. Zans hit the ground on his back with a jolt, the wind knocked out of him. The undead pinned him, its weight surprisingly heavy. A dead face leered inches from his own, the visage of an older man half-eaten by decay, empty eye sockets wriggling with maggots. Its jaws snapped, emitting a choking gurgle as it tried to bite Zans's throat. Zans grappled with it, using the hoe's handle to hold the snapping teeth at bay. His arm shook as the creature drooled viscous, foul slime onto his chest. The stench was overpowering, sweet rot and death. His stomach churned, but he dared not falter. If he let go, those jaws would tear into his neck. Master, he gasped, straining. Ormond, bleeding but still standing, dispatched the zombie he'd stabbed and hobbled over. With a roar, he swung his staff down on the creature atop Zans. The undead's skull cracked open, splattering blackened brain matter across the dirt. It went limp, finally ceasing its struggle. Zans shoved the corpse off and scrambled up, shaking all over. Thank you, he panted. Ormond gave a tight nod, but then he winced, nearly doubling over as the wounds on his chest bled freely. The old man was in bad shape. Master, you're hurt. Zans reached out to support him, but Ormond waved him off. I've had worse, Ormond lied, voice strained. He looked around at the burning village, at the scattered corpses, at the handful of undead still prowling the periphery now that most living had either escaped or been killed. A sorrow beyond words etched itself on his face. Graybrook, I fear it's lost, lad. Zanz opened his mouth to refute, to say there might still be survivors. But the words died as he too surveyed the devastation. Nearly every building was aflame or smashed. The screams had faded, replaced by an eerie chorus of crackling fires and distant moans. In the smoky glow, Zanz saw no sign of any villagers still standing in the open, just strewn bodies and shambling death. A crushing weight of despair settled on him. Ormond coughed wetly, drawing Zanz's attention. The old man's face was ashen, sweat beading on his brow. He pressed his back against a toppled cart to keep himself upright. "Zanz, come here, boy," he said hoarsely. Zanz knelt beside him immediately. "We need to treat your wounds, master. The satchel." He fumbled for a healing poultice inside the bag, but Ormond grabbed his wrist. "There's no time." Ormond's eyes bored into Zanz's. Despite the pain, they were steady and filled with urgency. "Listen to me. You need to leave, now. Slip away into the dark while you can." Zanz shook his head violently. "No, I won't leave you. I can help." "Quiet," Ormond rasped. "You saw that thing at the gate, yes? This is not some bandit raid. It's the work of a necromancer, a powerful one, possibly the very foe I feared might come." He swallowed hard, struggling to continue. "They hit larger towns to the east. I prayed we'd be spared, but damn it!" He struck the ground weakly in frustration, then grimaced at the flare of pain it caused. Zanz felt hot tears on his face, though he hadn't realized he was crying. "Master, please save your strength. We can find survivors, get you to safety." Ormond's grip on Zanz's wrist tightened with surprising strength. "Zanzvara, you must survive. Do you understand me? You have a destiny beyond this place, I'm sure of it." His voice wavered, then grew firm again. "Take what I taught you, what I've hidden for you, and live." Zanz blinked through tears, confused. Hidden? Destiny? He opened his mouth to question, but a guttural roar interrupted. Across the square, beyond the pall of smoke, a new cluster of undead stumbled into view, perhaps 6 or 7, remnants of the horde regrouping. Among them was one clad in tattered black robes who moved differently than the mindless ones. This figure held a staff with a sickly green crystal, and even at a distance Zanz could feel its malice as it seemed to survey the ruin it had wrought. Ormond followed Zanz's gaze, and his face hardened in resolve. "It's him," he whispered. "One of the necromancer's thralls, come to round up the dead or any survivors." The robed undead minion spotted them. It raised a bony hand, uttering a dry, cracked screech. The other zombies at its side turned and began loping towards Ormond and Zanz, drawn by the prospect of living prey. Zanz's heart thudded. He struggled to pull Ormond up. "We have to go!" Ormond didn't rise. Instead, he pushed a small object into Zanz's free hand. It was the amulet he always wore around his neck, a simple stone talisman etched with strange symbols. "Keep this safe, and forgive me, my boy." Zanz looked at him, bewildered. "Forgive ye?" Before he could finish, Ormond placed a bloodied palm against Zanz's chest. The old man's eyes fluttered shut as he began to chant under his breath in a language Zanz had never heard. The words sent a chill through the air, a resonance that made the very ground beneath them vibrate. Zanz felt panic surge anew. "Master, what are you?" A sudden pulse of cold energy flooded through Ormond's hand into Zanz's heart. It was as if icy water had replaced his blood. Zanz gasped, his vision exploding into darkness and stars. He felt his limbs seize, his body locked in place by unseen forces. 11. Ormond continued the incantation, voice rising above the approach of the undead. The amulet in Zanz's hand grew warm, then blazing hot. He couldn't move his fingers to drop it, even as the heat became nearly unbearable. Yet it didn't burn. Rather, the heat seemed to sink into his skin, into his blood, racing along his veins. The nearest undead reached them. A corpse with a cleaver raised its weapon to hack down at Ormond, but as it struck, a ripple of shadowy energy erupted from Ormond's chanting form. The cleaver bounced off an invisible barrier. The undead recoiled, as did the others, hissing at this unexpected magic. Ormond's eyes snapped open, now glowing with a fierce pale light. He met Zanz's gaze one last time. There was sorrow there, and love, and an aching apology. Then, with a final word of power that echoed like a thunderclap, he released the spell. Zanz was flung backward as if hit by a mule's kick. He flew a dozen paces and crashed to the ground, yet he felt no pain from the impact. A torrent of dark mist swirled from Ormond's hand and chest, coalescing into a tendril that struck Zans squarely where the amulet lay against his sternum. The world around Zans faded, all sound muffled except the thump of his own heartbeat echoing strangely in his ears. He was dimly aware of shapes, perhaps the undead, being hurled away by the same force that had thrown him. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Zans lay on his back, numb and unable to even blink. He wondered if he was dying. Then the cold feeling in his chest vanished, replaced by a sudden warmth and the rush of breath filling his lungs. He coughed, a jolt of pain bringing sensation back to his body. His vision cleared, and he found himself staring up at the smoke-stained sky. The sounds of crackling fire and distant moans filtered back in. Zans sat up, disoriented. The amulet was gone. No, it was still in his hand, but its stone had turned jet black and it felt inert like a dead coal. He didn't have time to ponder this because his eyes fell upon the scene ahead. A few yards away lay Ormond. The old man was motionless on his back. The earth around him was scorched in a strange circular pattern, and a handful of undead bodies were strewn about, twisted and broken as if dashed to the ground by a giant's hand. "Master!" Zans croaked. His limbs felt like lead, but he forced himself up and staggered to Ormond's side. He collapsed to his knees, shaking Ormond's shoulder. The apothecary's eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, their earlier light extinguished. His face seemed eerily peaceful, despite a thin trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. "No, no, no, no," Zans moaned, pressing trembling fingers to Ormond's neck, in search of a pulse he knew he would not find. There was nothing. His master was gone. Realization crashed down on him. The spell Ormond had given what remained of his life to save Zans. He had seen the wounds, known he was doomed, and made the ultimate sacrifice to protect his apprentice. 12 hot tears blurred Zans's vision. He bowed his head over Ormond's body, choking on a sob that felt like it would tear him apart. All around, Greybrook burned and the dead outnumbered the living. But in that moment, Zans could only keen softly, a broken sound escaping his lips as he wept for the only family he had left. He didn't know how long he knelt there. The world seemed distant, as if he were underwater. Eventually, a crackle of a collapsing timber nearby jolted him back to awareness that he was still in danger. Sniffling and wiping his face with a soot-stained sleeve, Zans gently closed Ormond's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered through trembling lips. "I won't waste it. I promise." He wasn't even sure what he meant. His mind was barely holding together, but it felt like something he had to say. Dragging himself to his feet, Zans surveyed the square. The robed undead thrall was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps Ormond's last magic had destroyed it or driven it off. A few ghouls still moved in the far edges of the village, but they seemed aimless now, picking through corpses rather than pursuing new victims. Maybe as dawn neared, the attack had run its course. Dawn, the sky in the east had seemed slightly lighter, a murky gray replacing black. He had survived the longest night of his life, though he felt as though a part of him had died in that darkness. Zans realized numbly that he still held Ormond's satchel slung at his side, and near Ormond's body lay the old staff. He picked the staff up, leaning on it heavily as a wave of exhaustion nearly toppled him. He needed to move, to find any other survivors, and get away before the necromancer's forces returned in full daylight. But he wouldn't leave Ormond like this, to be devoured or desecrated. Using the staff like a shovel, Zans began to scrape at the dirt next to his master's corpse. His hands soon took over, scooping desperately. The ground was hard and rocky, and after several minutes he had made only a shallow pit. His fingers were bleeding and raw, black grime under every nail. Finally, Zans stopped. This was futile. He couldn't properly bury Ormond here. Instead, he gently dragged the body into the shallow depression he'd managed. Crossing Ormond's arms over his chest, he took off his own cloak, miraculously still mostly intact, and laid it over Ormond's form. "I'll come back," he whispered, voice hitching. "I'll make a proper grave. One day." It was a promise he intended to keep if fate was kind enough to let him live that long. After a moment's hesitation, Zans unclasped the silver ring from Ormond's right hand, an heirloom the old man had always worn. He slid it onto his own index finger. It was too loose, but he curled his fist to hold it in place. A keepsake, and perhaps something to remember his promise by. That done, Zans knew he had to go. The remaining undead seemed to wander off toward the forest, and the fires were dying down, leaving the village a smoking ruin. Staying here was suicide. If more of the necromancer's army came, or if any saw the magic that had happened, he could be in danger. And what life was left here for him now? 13. He retrieved what he could: Ormond's satchel with a few surviving supplies, the staff, a half-full water skin off a dead traveler's belt, and a small knife from the inn's wreckage. The weight of these items was nothing compared to the weight in his heart. Before leaving the square, Zans found his gaze drawn to Hallows Field beyond the broken gate. The first pale light of dawn revealed the battlefield where he had been just hours before, now not quiet, but crawling with movement. He realized with horror that many of the dead from that cursed field had risen and marched on Greybrook. Splintered coffins and churned earth were visible even from here. Zans shuddered. The evil that could do this was far beyond him, for now. Clutching Ormond's staff, Zans turned his back on his home. With slow, heavy steps, he walked out of Greybrook, leaving the village of his childhood to smolder behind him. He didn't know where he was going yet, only that he was alone, alive, and forever changed. Chapter 3. From the Ashes. The dawn light found Zans trudging along an overgrown wagon trail that wound westward through rolling moorland. Each step was a small agony of exhaustion. He hadn't slept in over a day, and the night's horrors had carved a deeper fatigue into his bones than any physical labor ever could. Yet he kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Behind him, a pillar of smoke still marked the distant sky where Greybrook had burned. Zans forced himself not to look back. Every time he did, he saw it all again: the screaming faces, Ormond's final moments. Instead, he tried to focus on the present: the cheering of morning crickets, the dew on the tall grasses brushing against his legs, the cool bite of the autumn breeze on his tear-streaked cheeks. These small sensations reminded him he was alive. Alive, he thought bitterly, when so many others were not. Why him? Guilt gnawed at his stomach, as relentless as his hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday midday. Now the adrenaline had faded, his body's needs were catching up. But he had nothing to eat, save a few dried roots in Ormond's satchel that were meant for medicine, not meals. As the sun climbed, Zans crested a hill and paused to catch his breath. Ahead, the road bent downward toward a shallow stream, and by that stream stood a handful of figures. Instinctively, Zans ducked behind a bramble thicket, heart suddenly pounding. Were they bandits? Enemies? He peered cautiously. No, he recognized those shapes. Two older men, one leaning on the other. A woman with a child on her hip, and a young, dark-haired woman kneeling by the water, washing something. Mara. A knot of emotion tightened in Zans's chest. These were survivors from the inn's cellar. Mara, the miller's daughter, the innkeeper's wife, Helen, with her little boy, and the two old brothers who ran the windmill. They must have escaped Greybrook at first light. Zans stepped out from cover and raised a hand. Mara, he called, voice cracking from thirst and disuse. 14, the group startled. The older men clutched each other, alarmed, and little Noel, Helen's 4-year-old, began to cry weakly. Mara stood up, gripping a long kitchen knife, her eyes wild. She relaxed only slightly when she recognized Zans limping toward them. Zans? Mara's voice was hoarse. She looked nearly as exhausted and smoke-stained as he did. In a few strides she closed the distance and, to his surprise, threw her free arm around him in a brief, desperate hug. Oh, thank the gods! We thought you died! Zans blinked, momentarily stiff, then returned the hug gratefully. He hadn't realized how badly he'd needed the simple warmth of another human. I nearly did, he admitted. Helen stepped forward, juggling her child on her hip. You're Ormond's boy, she said softly, as if confirming to herself he was real. You made it out? Zans nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. He noticed all of them bore cuts and bruises. The older Miller brother had a makeshift bandage wrapped around one leg. The child Noel had a vacant 1,000-yard stare, likely too traumatized to even cry properly now. We waited as long as we could in the cellar, one of the old men said quietly. When dawn came and things went quiet, we crept out. The village? It was. He trailed off, eyes shining with tears. There were no words needed. They all knew what they had seen. We saw you in the square, the other brother added. When that thing attacked, we saw Ormond run to you. He hesitated, voice thick, and then there was a flash of light. After that, we didn't see either of you." Zans looked down, clenching his jaw. He felt Mara's hand gently touch his arm. "Zans, Master Ormond?" she asked quietly. He saved me," Zans whispered. "At the end, it cost him everything." Saying it aloud made it more real. His eyes burned, but he fought off the fresh tears threatening to fall. Helen murmured a prayer under her breath, and the survivors bowed their heads for a moment. Mara sniffled, wiping her face briskly. "I'm so sorry. He was a good man." Zans took a shaky breath and nodded. "He was." There was an awkward silence, filled by the babble of the stream. One of the Miller brothers finally rasped, "We can't stay here. We need to get as far away as possible. If those devils return." "They won't," Zans said, more sharply than he intended. The group looked at him in surprise. He wasn't entirely sure how he knew, but deep in his gut he felt certain that the undead attack had moved on. "They hit Graybrook and moved on. There's nothing left there for them." 15, the old man coughed. "Still, best not linger." He eyed Zans, not unkindly, but with the uncertain gaze people had always reserved for the alchemist's odd helper. "We were just resting a bit," Helen said. "Noel hasn't the strength to walk far, and my husband—" She swallowed, unable to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. Her husband, the innkeeper, had not made it out. "Where will you go?" Zans asked quietly. Mara answered, pushing a lock of soot-streaked hair behind her ear. "West, maybe. To Brevintown. My aunt lives there. It's fortified and far from here." Her voice wavered on the word far, betraying the fear that whatever happened might follow. Brevintown was a larger settlement, perhaps 2 days' journey along this very road. Zans had passed through it once with Ormond to trade. It had wooden walls and a small contingent of city guards. Perhaps it would be safe, at least safer than open countryside. "You're welcome to join us, at least until Brevin," offered Helen kindly. Safety in numbers. Zans hesitated. He felt an urge to keep these people safe, maybe as penance for those he couldn't, and truthfully, the thought of continuing alone so soon after everything made his stomach knot. "All right," he agreed softly. "At least until Brevin." Some tension seemed to lift from the group. Mara even gave a tiny smile. "Glad to have you, Zans. I saw what you did back at the inn. You saved us, you know, with that firebomb." Zans shrugged, looking away. He didn't feel like a hero. "I just copied what Ormond would have done." The older of the Miller brothers managed a grim chuckle. "Well, you did it well. Here." He reached into a satchel and drew out a small bundle. "We scavenged what we could from the inn's pantry when we left. It isn't much, but you should eat." He handed Zans a half loaf of hard bread and a bit of dried apple. Zans's mouth watered at the sight. "Thank you," he murmured, tearing into the food without ceremony. The bread was tough and the apple leathery, but to him it was a feast. They rested a short while by the stream. Zans refilled his water skin, helping the others drink and clean minor wounds. In the daylight, he noted how shell-shocked they all looked. Haunted eyes, flinches at every snap of twig. He probably looked much the same. By midday, they started moving again along the road. Zans walked near the front with Mara, who had armed herself with a rusty cleaver pulled from the inn's wreckage. Zans still had Ormond's staff, which he used as a walking stick. With his free hand, he clutched the satchel of supplies. He checked its contents, a few vials of simple medicine, bandages, a pouch of salt, and Ormond's leather-bound notebook, water-damaged but mostly intact. That little book was the sum of Ormond's knowledge and musings. Zans hadn't had a chance to read it yet, but having it close was a small comfort. 6 they traveled. An uneasy quiet fell. None of them wanted to talk about last night, yet it hung over them like a cloud. "Ready for the next segment, whenever you are. Ready for the next segment, whenever you are." They spread out, forming a half ring, ready to lunge. Mara pushed Helen and the child behind her and raised her cleaver. In the gloom, her face was pale but determined. Zans hefted his staff, trying to remember if any of Ormond's vials might help. There was a small flask of bitterleaf oil, useful to repel insects, useless against wolves. Pepper powder? He had a pouch of that for poultices. It could sting the eyes, maybe. As the largest wolf crept closer, Zans fumbled in the satchel. His fingers closed around a paper packet. He tore it open with trembling hands. With a sudden snarl, the lead wolf charged at Mara, seeing her as the one with the weapon. Mara slashed, but the wolf was quick. It dodged aside, feinting. Zan sprang up and flung a handful of the pepper powder at the beast's face. Some of the red granules hit their mark. The wolf snapped and shook its head, whining as the irritant reached its eyes and nose. "Yah! Get away!" Zan shouted, swinging his staff to appear bigger. The wolf snarled and backed off a few paces, sneezing. But the momentary victory was short-lived. The other two wolves chose that moment to attack from the flanks. One leapt at the Miller brothers, who both fell back with cries, the wolf upon them. The other lunged for Helen and Noel. Helen shielded her child with her body. Teeth sank into her forearm as she raised it instinctively against the wolf's bite. She screamed. Mara rushed to her aid, cleaver hacking down on the wolf's back. The animal yelped as the blade bit, releasing Helen and whirling on Mara with snapping jaws. 18 Zans, panic surging, ran to the brothers. One wolf had the eldest Miller pinned, its jaws worrying at his shoulder. The other brother was beating at the beast's back with his stick, to little effect. Without thinking, Zans drove the point of Ormond's staff hard into the wolf's ribcage. It was like spearing a hay bale, but he must have hit something vital. The wolf yipped and rolled off the old man, whirling to face this new attacker. The wolf's yellow eyes locked on Zan's. It snarled and pounced. Zans raised the staff horizontally just in time. The wolf's weight slammed into him, and he went down, wooden staff between him and the slavering maw. Fangs snapped inches from his face. Hot drool pattered onto his cheek. He was pinned, muscles straining to keep the wolf from tearing out his throat. Nearby he heard Mara shouting, the child screaming, wolves growling, a chaotic symphony of terror. No, not again, he thought in despair. Not when they had barely survived the first nightmare. As he grappled with the wolf, something in Zan shifted, a well of desperation opening into something cold and potent deep inside him. A memory flashed. Ormond's dying spell, the tendril of shadow that had pierced him. Was that power still within, waiting? His vision flickered oddly. The edges dimmed, the world sharpening to the snarling wolf above him. He felt a sudden pulse in his chest, in rhythm with his racing heartbeat. Thump, each beat sending a tingling surge through his veins. "Get off!" Zans growled through clenched teeth. His right hand slipped from the staff and he thrust it forward, palm splayed toward the wolf's face. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He only knew he had to act, had to use whatever he had been given. An instinctive word bubbled to his lips, unbidden and foreign. Rise! He didn't even know who or what he was commanding. But in that instant, an answer came. From the corner of his eye, behind the wolf, Zan saw the bloodied wolf he had stabbed in the ribs, the one he thought mortally wounded, suddenly spasm. With a bone-cracking contortion, the creature lurched back to its feet. Its eyes, once golden, now burned with a ghostly pale light. With a snarl that sounded oddly hollow, the wolf launched itself at the very live wolf pinning Zan's. Fur and fangs blurred as the undead wolf, for Zan's knew it could be nothing else, collided with its living packmate. The attacking wolf was knocked off Zan's, yelping in surprise as rotten jaws clamped onto its neck. Zan's rolled away, heart pounding wildly. He scrambled up just in time to see Mara finish off the wolf that had gone after Helen. She had managed to slit its throat while it was distracted by pain from her cleaver blow. That wolf now lay twitching at her feet. 19. The last living wolf was struggling in the skeletal grip of Zan's newly risen minion. The undead wolf's once glossy coat was patchy with mange and blood. Its eyes glowed like witch-fire as it savaged its former comrade with unnatural ferocity. In moments, the living wolf went limp, its throat torn out. All fell silent, save for the ragged panting of the survivors. Mara stood over Helen and Noel, blade dripping, and expression equal parts horror and relief. The Miller brothers were on the ground, one nursing a torn shoulder, the other trying to staunch the bleeding with trembling hands. And Zan stared at the abomination he had wrought. The undead wolf released its kill and padded slowly back toward him. One of its forelegs was bent at an impossible angle, clearly broken when it first fell, but it moved as if it felt no pain. Its dead eyes fixed on Zan's, awaiting? Instructions? Dismissal? He wasn't sure. He realized he was still holding his hand out. He lowered it uncertainly, and at that gesture the undead wolf stopped and sat on its haunches before him, bloodied muzzle grinning in a deathly facsimile of obedience. A wave of dizziness hit Zan's. His limbs suddenly felt ice cold and weak. The adrenaline rush that had carried him through that strange act drained away, leaving him swaying on his feet. What? What is that? Mara's voice was barely above a whisper, edged with fear. She had Helen's uninjured arm around her shoulders, helping the older woman up. Both of them stared, eyes wide, at the macabre scene. Two dead wolves on the ground, and one impossibly standing, waiting calmly beside Zan's. Zan's licked his dry lips, searching for words. I don't know how to explain, he stammered. It was the truth. He himself didn't fully grasp what he had done, only that in his desperation he had tapped into necromancy. The Miller brothers looked at Zan's as if seeing him for the first time. The injured one made the sign of the sun god with a shaking hand. Necromancer, he croaked. Death magic. The label hung in the air like a noxious fume. Zan's felt his heart constrict. I didn't mean. He stepped back, and the undead wolf mirrored him, still as a shadow at his side. Helen clutched Noll protectively. The child peeked out, that's too young to understand, but certainly frightened by the tension. Mara's face was conflicted, gratitude and revulsion warring within her. Zan's, you saved us, she said slowly, eyes flicking to the corpse wolf. But at what cost? What have you done? Zan's couldn't meet her gaze. Shame and confusion welled up. They were alive only because he had done something profane. Would they rather have died? Or perhaps they would have prevailed without his interference? He didn't know. I didn't have a choice, he whispered. It happened. I wasn't even sure I could. He stopped, realizing anything he said would likely sound like an excuse. Mara took a cautious step forward, easing Helen to sit by a tree. She studied Zan's, her expression softening slightly as she saw the young man shaking and distraught. Zan's, is this from Ormond? She asked gently. Did he teach you this? He vehemently shook his head. No, Master Ormond abhorred dark sorcery. Zan's struggled for explanation. When he saved me, something changed. I think he passed a power to me. I don't understand it myself, Mara, but I swear to you I would never use it to harm any of you. I only wanted to protect. A wet, gurgling whine interrupted him. The undead wolf still sat patiently, but its battered form was beginning to collapse. The unnatural animation keeping it intact was fading. One of its glowing eyes flickered and went dark. With a final rattling breath, the creature slumped to the ground, truly lifeless once more. Whatever energy Zan's had mustered was spent. A collective sigh of relief, or perhaps lingering fear, escaped the group. The immediate threat was over, but an uneasy silence remained. The injured Miller brother grimaced as his sibling tied off a bandage on his shoulder. Dark magic never comes without a price, he muttered, eyeing Zan's warily. Mara shot the man a quelling look. He saved our lives, she said firmly. Then more softly to Zan's, we all saw terrible things last night. Is it so strange that some of that fell power might have marked you? She was trying to rationalize it, to make it palatable. Zan's gave her a grateful if wan smile. Marked, maybe, he said quietly. I wish I knew what Ormond truly did. I think he intended for me to have a fighting chance, whatever that meant. Helen, cradling Noll, looked at Zan's with wary kindness. Ormond trusted you, dear. And so do I, magic or no magic. She winced at her bitten arm, and Mara knelt to apply a clean rag to staunch the blood. The older men, however, were clearly unnerved. Better to reach Brevin by tomorrow, one said gruffly. We can get proper aid there. Zan's understood. In Brevin, they would likely part ways. A numb part of him even felt relief. Their fearful glances were painful to bear, and he suspected matters would only worsen once the shock subsided. He spent the remainder of the night tending quietly to wounds and making sure the camp was secure. No more wolves approached. They all kept a cautious distance from the pile of wolf carcasses, especially the one that had briefly walked again. Zan's decided to drag that particular body further into the bushes, out of sight, before the others could dwell on it. By first light, they set out again. It was a somber, silent morning. Zan's noticed Mara avoiding looking him in the eye, though she stayed near him as they walked, perhaps out of lingering loyalty or simple prudence. The others gave him polite nods, but spoke in hushed tones amongst themselves, uncertain what to say or feel. 21. As the road wound into higher ground, Brevin town finally came into view around midday, wooden palisades and a stone watchtower perched on a hill. The sight drew a collective breath of relief from the group. Smoke rose from cooking fires within the walls. Life and normalcy still existed there. At the outskirts of Brevin, by a crossroads marked with a faded signpost, Zan stopped. Mara and the others halted too, looking back at him. "You're not coming?" Mara asked quietly. Zan shifted the strap of the satchel on his shoulder. "This is where we part," he said. The truth was he felt uneasy about entering a crowded town so soon, not until he understood his new condition. What if someone somehow sensed the necromancy on him? Or worse, what if it manifested unexpectedly again? Helen approached and surprised him by briefly touching his hand. "You could find help in Brevin, dear. You're wounded too, inside if not out." Zans mustered a faint smile. "I'll manage. I have to figure out what I am now, what I'm meant to do. I can't do that behind walls." The older of the Miller brothers offered a curt nod that might have been respect. "Take care, lad, and thank you." The other, arm in a sling, was less warm. "Aye, and may the gods watch you, even the dark ones," he muttered, which earned him an elbow from his brother. Helen adjusted Null on her hip and attempted a smile. "We'll tell the guard captain what happened. Perhaps they'll send word to warn others." Zans wasn't sure an honest account would do him any favors, but he simply nodded. He turned to Mara last. She bit her lip. "I'm sorry if we acted afraid of you," she said. "You've been nothing but decent and brave through all this, Zans. More than we had any right to expect. I won't forget it." Zans felt a lump in his throat. "Nor will I forget any of you. I hope you find peace in Brevin." Impulsively, Mara stepped forward and hugged him once more. This time, Zans returned the embrace fully. In another life, perhaps, he might have fancied her, but that path was closed now, and they both knew it. Still, the gesture gave him comfort. "Goodbye, Zanzvara," Mara said, stepping back with tears in her eyes. "May we meet again in kinder times." "Goodbye," he replied softly. He watched as the four survivors limped their way up the road toward Brevin's gates. Mara looked back one last time, raising a hand. He raised his staff in acknowledgement. Then they were gone into the town, swallowed by the living world that Zans no longer felt part of. 22, standing alone at the crossroads, Zans felt overwhelming solitude, but also a strange freedom. The road stretched out in multiple directions. He pulled Ormond's notebook from the satchel, opening it with care. The pages were filled with cramped writing, sketches of herbs, arcane symbols he didn't recognize. Toward the back, he found entries that caught his eye. References to necromancy, to a ritual of transference, and notes addressed to an old colleague named Cylindra in Blackspire. One line read, "If the worst comes, I entrust the boy with the burden and the gift. Cylindra will understand. He must seek her out." Blackspire Library, the third shelf under Zans, traced the ink with a fingertip. Blackspire, he recalled hearing of that city, a far larger place than Brevin, home to an ancient scholar's tower. It lay to the south, many weeks of travel. So, Ormond had indeed left him a path to follow. He closed the book, determination kindling within. He wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He had a mission now. Master Ormond had sacrificed himself so Zans could live, and perhaps so Zans could do what Ormond could not. Zans tightened his grip on the staff. The sun was past its zenith, beginning to dip westward. A new road beckoned, one that would lead him through unknown territories, toward knowledge, danger, and who knew what else. He felt fear, yes, but also a spark of grim resolve. "I won't remain that frightened boy in the shadows," he murmured to himself as he took his first steps toward Blackspire. The wind carried his words away across the fields. "I'll master this power, on my own terms. I'll make sure what happened to Greybrook never happens again, not if I can stop it." With that oath echoing in his mind, Zanzvara walked on, a lone figure against the vast expanse of the world, weaker than some, underestimated by all, but growing stronger and darker with each step out of the ashes of yesterday. Chapter 4, Aftermath. Zanzvara stood amid the smoldering ruins of his village as dawn's first light revealed the full horror of the night. Blackened timbers and collapsed thatch still smoked where homes had been. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and death. In the center of what had been the village square lay bodies of neighbors and friends, strewn about like broken dolls. Zanz's limbs trembled with exhaustion and grief as he moved from one form to the next, silently begging for any sign of life. He found none. They were all gone. Farmers, children, the old baker who'd given him sweet rolls as a boy, all dead. Zans choked back a sob. His eyes burned, both from acrid smoke and from tears he refused to let fall. He felt hollow, as if a piece of himself had died with them. Near the well, Zan spotted a familiar figure collapsed against the stone rim. Ormond, his mentor. The old man's robes were soaked in blood and ichor. His sightless eyes stared at the brightening sky. A ragged hole marred his chest where some undead horror had struck a fatal blow. Zans fell to his knees beside Ormond's body, finally allowing tears to blur his vision. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely, voice cracking in the silence. Zans remembered the chaos of the night before, the undead pouring into the village under a pale moon, the villagers' screams, and Ormond standing in the midst of it all, chanting in a language Zans did not know. He remembered the flash of greenish light as Ormond placed a trembling hand against Zans's chest in the final moments of that battle. The memory was hazy. Zans recalled only agony and cold flooding his veins, and Ormond's voice uttering an incantation. Then darkness. Now Zans understood. Ormond had given him something, a last desperate gift to survive the onslaught. A mysterious power thrummed faintly within Zans, like an ember of cold fire lodged behind his ribs. He could feel it now in the stillness. Strange whispers at the edge of his mind, shadows dancing at the corners of his vision when he looked upon the corpses. He tore his gaze from Ormond's lifeless eyes and swallowed hard. "Thank you, master," Zans murmured, gently closing Ormond's eyes with a shaking hand. "I won't waste what you've given me." Though he did not fully grasp the nature of this necromantic power, he knew Ormond's sacrifice must not be in vain. There was no time for a proper burial. The undead horde had moved on, but they could return, and Zans knew he could not stay here. The village of his birth, Aramur, was lost. He would have to carry the memory of its people with him and find a way to use this dark gift to ensure such horror never befell another home. Working quickly, Zan scavenged what supplies he could. He retrieved a leather satchel from the wreckage of Ormond's cottage and found intact vials of herbs and powders, Ormond's alchemical reagents. These and a few stale pieces of bread from a half-crushed pantry were all he could muster. Before leaving, he noticed Ormond's oak staff lying on the ground where the old man fell. The staff's once polished surface was charred and nicked, but it remained unbroken. Zans picked it up, feeling a faint warmth pulse from the wood. With a deep breath, he took it as a keepsake and tool. One at the village outskirts, Zans cast a final look back at Aramur. The rising sun painted the smoke in hues of gold and orange, a cruel contrast to the carnage below. "I will remember you all," he whispered, "and I will find out who did this." Clutching Ormond's staff and the satchel of supplies, Zanzibar turned and began his journey out of the charred remnants of his past, stepping onto the overgrown road that led away from home and into an uncertain future. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Dead. Zans traveled on foot along the dirt road that wound through dense forests and gentle hills, leaving the only home he'd ever known behind. Each step was heavy, his body still battered from the attack, and his soul weighed down by loss. Gnarled tree roots snaked across the path. More than once he stumbled, barely catching himself with Ormond's staff. As midday sun filtered through the canopy, Zans's weariness forced him to rest. He found a mossy log by the road and sank onto it. The forest was unsettlingly quiet, no bird songs or chittering of squirrels. It was as if the wildlife sensed the lingering aura of death clinging to Zans. He closed his eyes and tried to calm his thoughts. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw flashes of last night's horror, skeletal faces twisted in eternal grins, bony hands rending through flesh. He jerked awake with a gasp, heart pounding. His hands had unconsciously tightened around the staff. Calm, he told himself. Keep moving. But first he needed water and a moment to think. Zans rummaged through Ormond's satchel and found a water skin. As he drank, a faint noise pricked his ears, a low rustle from the thicket across the road. He froze, senses alert. The bushes swayed again. Slowly, Zans set down the water skin and rose to his feet, gripping the staff defensively. From the underbrush emerged a figure, small, hunched, and moving with an awkward, jerking gait. At first, Zans thought it a wounded traveler, but as it staggered into a shaft of sunlight, his blood ran cold. It was a corpse. The man, once a woodcutter, judging by the ragged remnants of an axe blade embedded in his rotting belt, was clearly dead, with skin a sickly gray-green and eyes clouded white. Yet he shambled forward, animated by foul magic. One of the undead had strayed from the horde, or perhaps been left behind. Zan's mouth went dry. He had no real weapon apart from the staff, and he was exhausted. The animated corpse lifted its head, sniffing at the air, then fixed its milky eyes on him. With a gurgling moan, it lunged. Zan's barely sidestepped, and the corpse collided with the log he'd been sitting on. The woodcutter's corpse was slow but relentless. It turned toward Zan's again, claw-like fingers reaching for him. Zan swung Ormon's staff. The oak cracked across the corpse's back, knocking it to its knees, but it kept coming, crawling now and swiping at Zan's ankles. Panic flared, a wave of cold pulse from Zan's chest, the same cold he'd felt when Ormond touched him. Before he knew what he was doing, Zan's thrust out his free hand and shouted a word he didn't remember hearing before. "Cease!" The word echoed with unnatural force. The corpse halted, one arm still raised. A two-shudder passed through its decayed form, and for a heartbeat the milky eyes flickered with a greenish light, as if recognizing a new master. Zan's felt the necromantic power surge within him, instinctively reaching out to the undead creature. He hadn't meant to cast a spell, but something within him had responded to his desperation. The corpse remained kneeling, quivering as it fought against unseen bonds. His heart thundered. Could he command it? The idea was horrifying and yet strangely logical. Ormond's gift was necromancy. Zan's took a steadying breath and with trembling resolve tried another word that came unbidden to his tongue. Rise! The corpse slowly stood up from its knees. Though its dead eyes stared blankly, its posture suggested it was awaiting orders. Zan's mind raced. He had stopped its attack, but what now? The thought of using a corpse, even a stranger's, for help felt wrong. Yet he couldn't deny that this thrall might be useful, or at least dangerous if left roaming. Still keeping a cautious distance, Zan's gave a tentative command. Stay! Do not move, unless I say. The undead woodcutter remained still, swaying slightly. It appeared the power held for now. Zan's wiped cold sweat from his brow. He realized his legs were shaking as adrenaline coursed through him. Approaching carefully, he examined the corpse. There was no saving this poor soul. He had likely been killed by the horde and reanimated by residual dark magic. I'm sorry, Zan's thought silently. I'll free you if I can. It was a merciful thought, though he wasn't sure how to put the dead back to rest. Racking his brain, Zan's recalled Ormond once mentioning the principle of necromancy, the power to bind and to release souls. Perhaps if he'd somehow bound this one, he could also release it. He concentrated on that cold ember inside, willing it to withdraw from the corpse. Rest, he whispered, voice softer now. Be free. For a terrible moment nothing happened. The corpse remained upright and still. Then it shuddered again, more violently. A faint sigh escaped its bluish lips, and the unnatural light in its eyes winked out. With a final exhale, the woodcutter's corpse collapsed to the dirt, now truly lifeless. Zan's exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A surge of emotion welled up, relief, revulsion, astonishment. He had done it. He had commanded an undead and then released it. The realization that he truly wielded necromantic power made his stomach churn, yet there was also a spark of grim satisfaction. Ormond's gift worked. Regaining his composure, Zan's knew he couldn't linger. The encounter had shown him the potential of his new abilities and the danger that lurked even in broad daylight. He dragged the woodcutter's corpse off the road and covered it with some branches and leaves, a crude semblance of a burial. May you find peace beyond, he murmured. With trembling hands, he adjusted the strap of his satchel and continued down the road, now more wary. As he walked, faint echoes seemed to whisper at the edges of his hearing. He couldn't discern words, but it felt like the voices of the departed rustling like dead leaves. Was it the forest, or the necromantic power 3 attuning him to the presence of the dead? Zan's tightened his grip on the staff and pushed forward, haunted by the whispers of the dead that only he could hear. Chapter 6. A Quiet Village. By dusk, the forest began to thin, and the dirt road widened. Zan's trudged onward with heavy steps until he saw the welcoming sight of lantern light flickering through the trees. Relief washed over him when he realized he had reached another settlement. Emerging from the woods, he beheld a modest village nestled in a valley. Smoke curled from chimneys, and a few figures moved about, finishing their evening chores. This village, Lothaven, as a creaking wooden sign by the road indicated, appeared untouched by the horrors that had razed Aramor. Zans felt an irrational surge of anger that life here continued so normally while his own home lay in ashes. He pushed the thought away. It wasn't these villagers' fault. If anything, seeing a place at peace steeled his resolve to protect such peace elsewhere. He paused at the edge of town, suddenly conscious of his appearance. Soot and dried blood stained his clothes, and fatigue etched dark circles under his eyes. If he walked in like this, he might cause alarm. Zans detoured to a small stream that ran alongside the road and did his best to wash his face and hands. The icy water helped wake him up. He scrubbed at a few stubborn bloodstains on his sleeves until they faded. Night was falling as Zans finally headed into Lothaven. The main street was little more than a muddy lane lined with simple wooden buildings. An inn with a painted sign of a foaming mug stood near the village center, golden light and muted laughter spilling from its windows. The normalcy of the sound felt foreign after the silence of devastation he'd left behind. Zans took a deep breath and entered the inn. The warmth of the common room and the smell of stew nearly brought tears to his eyes. For a moment he simply stood there, letting the buzz of conversation wash over him. A few patrons glanced his way, travelers and locals sharing long tables, but most paid no heed. He quietly made his way to an empty seat in a corner. A serving girl approached, and Zans fumbled for coin to pay for a meal. He had a few copper pieces, scavenged from Ormond's cottage, that he offered for a bowl of stew and some bread. The girl eyed his bruised face and tattered clothes, but said nothing as she took the coins and left. As Zans waited for his food, he listened to the conversations around him. Two merchants at a nearby table were speaking in low, excited tones about increased guard patrols on the roads. "Bandits?" one asked. "Worse," the other murmured. "They say undead. Saw it myself. A patrol found walking corpses near the crossroads to Dowry. The king's men are investigating." Zans's heart skipped. Undead at the crossroads. That could be near Aramor. The merchants continued, oblivious to their eavesdropper. "Haven't seen the like in decades. Some blame old warlocks. Others say the graves are cursed." "Bah, just tall tales to scare children," grumbled a farmer from across the room. "Dead don't walk on their own. Probably bandits dressed in bones to spook folk." Several listeners chuckled or nodded, though the merchants looked unconvinced. Zans clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain silent. He knew all too well the dead did walk, and it was no tall tale. Someone had orchestrated the attack on his village, possibly the same someone causing these other undead sightings. Corrupted kingdoms, necromancers, ancient secrets. Ormond's frantic words from the night before echoed in his mind, bits and pieces he barely remembered in the chaos. He needed more information. The serving girl returned with a bowl of hearty stew and a hunk of bread. Zans thanked her softly and ate with the quiet desperation of a starving man. Each spoonful warmed him from within, soothing more than just his hunger. As he ate, he noticed a bulletin board near the bar, posted with various notices and messages. One parchment, pinned under a dagger, depicted a crude sketch of a skull over a crescent moon. Beneath it read, "By order of the king, reward for information on necromancers or practitioners of dark arts." Zans swallowed hard, nearly choking on the bread. The king's notice was likely intended to assure people the crown was handling the undead threat, but to him it felt personal. If anyone discovered his newfound power, he could be mistaken for the very evil he sought to fight. He pulled his cloak tighter instinctively, as if it could hide the invisible mark of necromancy he feared might be on him. Finishing his meal, Zans mulled over his next move. The world now knew of the undead attacks, which meant news of Aramor might have spread. He wondered if any others from his village survived and fled, perhaps coming through Lothaven. But there was no way to ask without drawing attention. He decided he needed to leave at first light and head for a larger town or city, somewhere with libraries or scholars who might help him understand what he carried inside him. Ormond had often spoken of the great archives in the city of Greyport, where one could find knowledge on any arcane subject. Perhaps there he could find clues about the necromantic power now bonded to him and who might be behind the attacks. For now, though, he needed rest. Renting a room at the inn cost him his remaining coin, but the prospect of a bed, no matter how lumpy, was too tempting. Zans climbed the narrow stairs to a tiny attic room offered by the innkeeper. Behind a flimsy wooden door was a simple cot and a small window overlooking the quiet village street. Zans shut the door and secured the latch. Only then did he let his guarded posture slump. Safe for the moment, he set Ormond's staff within arm's reach and lay down on the cot. Exhaustion claimed him almost instantly. That night he dreamed of cold voices and ghostly green light, of Ormond's hand on his chest and the image of a shadowy figure watching him with glowing eyes from afar. Chapter 7. Unwanted Attention. The next morning, Zans awoke to weak sunlight filtering through the attic window. For a moment, he lay still, enveloped in the unfamiliar comfort of a bed and a roof over his head. Reality rushed back as he remembered why he wasn't waking up at home. Aramor was gone. 5. He dressed quickly in his still dirty clothes, grimacing at the lingering smell of smoke embedded in them. Downstairs, the common room was quieter than the night before, with only a few early risers about. Zans planned to slip out of Lothhaven quietly and make his way toward Greyport. However, as he moved toward the door, a gruff voice called out, "Oi, lad, you there?" Zans tensed and turned. A burly man with a bushy beard sat at a table near the door, a tankard in hand despite the early hour. He wore a chainmail vest over a padded tunic and had a long sword leaning against his chair, clearly a mercenary or guard. "You came in late last night, looked like you'd been through the ringer," the man said, eyeing Zans up and down. "Noticed the burned cloak? You from somewhere nearby?" Zans's mind raced. This man had a keen eye. "Just a traveler," Zans replied cautiously. "Had a rough journey, that's all," the bearded mercenary grunted. "That's so? Word is some folks passed through yesterday evening, said they saw a village torched not far from the crossroads, claimed undead were the cause." He paused meaningfully. "Wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Zans tightened his grip on his staff. Was this man suspicious of him as a necromancer, or just curious? His exhaustion had made him careless in appearance. Forcing an even tone, Zans answered, "I saw the smoke from afar, but didn't go near. Figured it was bandits or a tragedy I couldn't fix." The mercenary studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "A tragedy indeed. I'm headed that way today with a group to check it out. King's orders, you see. If what the rumors say is true, we'll be needing capable folk to help deal with unnatural issues." Zans swallowed. "I'm not looking for trouble, sir. Just trying to get to Greyport." The man shrugged and took a swig from his tankard. "Greyport, eh? Long road. Could use an extra scout or pair of eyes on the road if you're interested in traveling with us. Safety in numbers." He glanced at Zans's staff. "You any good with that stick?" Zans forced a small smile. "I can handle myself," he said, dodging specifics. Traveling with a group of mercenaries planning to investigate Aramor was the last thing he wanted. Too many questions could arise. "But I prefer to travel alone." "Suit yourself," the mercenary grunted, turning back to his morning ale. "If you change your mind, we leave at mid-morn. Just meeting up by the south road." Zans dipped his head in polite farewell and slipped out the inn door. The sky was pale gray, clouds threatening rain. He pulled his cloak tighter and walked briskly down the lane, heading northeast toward Greyport. If mercenaries and King's men were already mobilizing, it meant news of the undead attacks was spreading fast. He wanted to be far away before anyone connected him to Aramor or discovered the strange power he carried. As he passed the last house, he heard a shout behind him. "Wait, young man!" Zans turned to see the inn's serving girl jogging toward him, holding something. She caught up, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You forgot this," she said, extending her hand. In it was a small leather-bound book, Ormond's journal. In the turmoil of leaving the inn, Zans had accidentally left it on the table. Thank you," Zans stammered, gently taking the journal. It was one of the few personal items he had from Ormond's belongings, filled with notes on herbs and cryptic references to arcane studies. "I appreciate it." The girl, perhaps a year or two younger than Zans, gave a shy smile. "Safe travels," she said softly. Then, hesitating, if the rumors are true about undead, just be careful on the road, all right? My cousin in the next town said some horrible things have been happening." Zans nodded, touched by the concern. "I'll be careful. You take care as well." As she turned back, Zans felt a pang of longing for normalcy, for conversations that didn't hide secrets or fear. But normalcy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Journal safely stowed in his satchel, Zans continued on his way out of Lothaven. He had a long journey ahead. Greyport lay many days to the north, while Loth and winter's chill was settling in. Still, determination kept him warm. With each step, he resolved to grow stronger and wiser. He would unravel the mystery of the undead attacks, master the necromantic gift given to him, and ensure Ormond's sacrifice had meaning. Chapter 8. A Lesson in Alchemy. 3 days of travel passed as Zans trekked toward Greyport. The road wound through frosted meadows and sparse woodlands. He encountered only the occasional farmer's cart or wandering peddler. For the most part, he kept to himself and camped off the road at night, wary of both the living and dead. The necromantic whispers at the edge of his hearing had quieted somewhat since the encounter with the woodcutter's corpse, for which he was grateful. He wondered if the distance from mass death or his own control was improving. On the 4th day, nearing dusk, Zans reached a crossroads marked by a weathered signpost. According to the marker, Greyport was still another week's journey north. Another arrow pointed west to a town called Highbrook, just a short detour off the main road. Snow flurries began to drift from the darkening sky, and Zans realized he needed proper shelter for the night. Highbrook was not part of his original plan, but it promised a warm inn and potentially a chance to resupply. The thought of a hot meal and a roof outweighed the risk of delay. He turned west. 7 Highbrook was larger than Lothaven, with stout timber buildings and a stone wall indicating it had once been a holdfast. As Zans entered the town gates, he noticed signs of recent trouble. A few buildings bore scorch marks, and one home had its door shattered off its hinges. Townsfolk were hurriedly reinforcing windows with planks. A trio of militiamen lugged a broken barricade aside to clear the street. Zans stopped one of the militiamen, feigning casual curiosity. "Pardon, did something happen here?" he asked. The guard, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, blew out a breath. "Trouble with the dead, stranger. Same as everywhere, it seems. 2 nights ago, a pack of walking corpses came out of the old cemetery hill. We drove them off, but not before they did some damage." He gestured to the broken door nearby. "Thankfully, no one was killed, praise the gods. Town's been on edge since." Zans nodded. His fears confirmed that the undead incidents were widespread. "Any idea what caused it?" The guard shrugged. "Some say old magic stirring. There's talk of a necromancer in these parts, but we searched the cemetery and found no sign of dark rituals. Could be something foul tainting the land itself." He shook his head and gave Zans a once-over. "Get yourself indoors before full dark, friend. The Ironheart Inn is just ahead." Thanking him, Zans headed toward the inn. As he approached, he heard raised voices from an open doorway across the street. "Telling you, I can help," a man's voice insisted. Zans glanced over. The voice came from a small workshop, its window aglow with lamplight. A wooden sign above the door depicted a mortar and pestle, an alchemist's shop. In the doorway stood a wiry man in a stained apron, arguing with a tall fellow wearing a town councilor's sash. "We've had enough of your help, Eden," the councilor snapped. "That concoction you set off nearly burned down the granary." "It was a miscalculation," the alchemist protested. "But I know I can create something to protect the town. Just give me another chance." The counselor threw up his hands in frustration and marched off into the night, nearly bumping into Zans as he passed. The alchemist, Eden, noticed Zans lingering inside. "Come to gawk at the mad alchemist, have you?" he said bitterly. Zans offered a polite smile. "Actually, I'm a traveler and something of an apprentice in alchemy myself. I heard what happened and I might be able to lend a hand." It was a bold offer. Zans's knowledge was basic, but Ormond had taught him plenty of theory, and this could be an opportunity to help and gain a friend. Eden squinted at him. "You, a lad of what, 17? 18? And an alchemist?" "In training," Zans corrected. "My mentor was knowledgeable in herbs and potions." That much was true. Ormond's journal in his satchel attested to it. The alchemist stepped aside and gestured for Zans to enter the shop. Inside, the place was cluttered with glass jars, bubbling alembics, and drying herbs hung from rafters. The air smelled of lavender, sulfur, and something metallic. "Name's Eden," he said. "Master alchemist of this humble town, not that the council appreciates it." Zans introduced himself with a false surname, Zans Grey. not wanting to risk any recognition. What were you trying to make, if I may ask? You mentioned protecting the town. Eden's eyes lit with enthusiasm at the question. Ah, I was working on an alchemical fire trap. The plan was to deploy flasks around the town perimeter that would ignite when a corpse shambles by, purge the blighters in one swoop. He rummaged through a workbench clutter to find a half-burnt scroll, but the damned fuse timings were off. One went early and, well, nearly took the granary with it. Zan scanned the notes. Eden had mixed a flammable pitch with powdered magnesium and sulfur. Volatile indeed. Your idea is clever, Zan said diplomatically, but the trigger mechanism is too sensitive. Have you considered using an alchemical reagent that reacts specifically to necrotic flesh? Perhaps silver nitrate or blessed water infusion, something that only activates in the presence of undead taint. Eden's eyebrows shot up. That could work. Silver does react to necromancy in theory. You're saying a solution of silver nitrate, stabilized with holy water? Yes, it might glow or heat up when near the rot. The two fell into a deep conversation, exchanging ideas and refining the concept. Zans felt a flicker of excitement. This was familiar ground, problem-solving with knowledge and ingenuity rather than brute force. Together they drafted a new design for an undead proximity mine, one less prone to accidental detonation. Eden was impressed with Zan's unconventional suggestions, and Zans in turn learned new techniques from the seasoned alchemist. Hours passed. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, blanketing Highbrook in white. The inn was likely closed up for the night by now, but Zans didn't mind. He was warm by Eden's hearth, sipping a cup of spiced tea the alchemist had brewed. By the time they were satisfied with the revised alchemical trap, midnight was near. Eden clapped Zans on the back. You, my young friend, have the makings of a fine alchemist. Highbrook owes you one if this keeps us safe. Zan smiled, feeling a rare glimmer of pride. I'm glad I could help. We should test them carefully tomorrow, though, maybe outside the walls. Agreed, Eden said, then added more softly. And thank you. Not often someone listens to an old crackpot like me. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Zan's expression turned somber. If more people listened to wisdom, maybe my village would still be standing, he found himself saying quietly. At that, Eden put a hand on Zan's shoulder. I heard what the guards said. If you came from one of those attacked villages, I'm truly sorry. We'll make sure Highbrook doesn't share that fate. Zans nodded, not trusting himself to speak without his voice breaking. The kindness and newfound camaraderie were almost overwhelming after so many days alone with grief. You can stay here tonight, Eden offered, gesturing to a cot in the corner of the workshop. Safer than the inn, and I could use the help tomorrow preparing these mixtures. Grateful and relieved, Zans accepted. As he settled onto the cot, he felt a sense of accomplishment. In a small way, he had made a difference using knowledge and creativity, impressing someone not with raw power, but with problem solving. It was a side of himself he hadn't had a chance to use since the attack. For a little while, he felt almost like the old Zans, the curious apprentice, rather than a harried survivor with dark magic in his veins. He drifted to sleep to the soft crackle of Eden's hearth fire and the faint smell of herbs, hopeful that tomorrow would bring a safer dawn for Highbrook. Chapter 9, By Flame and Night. The following day, under a pale winter sun, Zans and Eden tested their newly crafted alchemical traps outside Highbrook's walls. They filled small clay pots with the silver nitrate solution and Eden's refined flammable pitch, sealed with wax and a pressure trigger attuned to necrotic energy. A curious crow, feathers black as midnight, watched them from a nearby fence post as they worked. The bird cocked its head at Zans, unblinking, and for a moment reminded him of Ormond's old raven companion that used to perch in the rafters back home. Zans felt a pang of sadness and quickly refocused on the task at hand. Eden set one pot about 20 paces out and tossed a sack of old bones, gathered from a butcher, toward it to simulate an undead presence. The trap ignited in a burst of green-tinted flame, incinerating the bones. It worked. The reaction to the trace death essence in the bones triggered the explosion as intended. Delighted, Eden whooped and clapped his hands. Brilliant! The council will eat their words. Word of their success traveled fast. By evening, A few of the town guard had carefully placed the new traps around the cemetery and the main road approaches. Though nervous about handling the volatile pots, they trusted Eden's oversight and, by extension, Zanz's input. The townsfolk of Highbrook prepared for the coming night with cautious optimism rather than paralyzing fear. Zanz remained in Eden's shop, double-checking the remaining stock of traps. He planned to leave for Grayport in the morning, but a part of him felt compelled to see this through, to ensure the town was safe through the night. Highbrook had welcomed him, however briefly, and he felt responsible for them now. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Eden had dozed off in a chair by the hearth after their long day. Zanz sat by the window of the workshop, Ormond's staff across his lap, gazing out at the snow-dusted street. The crow he'd seen earlier was perched on a rooftop across the way, oddly still, almost like a sentry. The hours crept by. Just after midnight, Zanz felt it, a prickling at the edge of his senses, a cold wave that made his breath catch. The whispers in his mind stirred. Something was out there, in the darkness beyond the walls. Zanz gently shook Eden awake. "They're coming," he whispered. Eden blinked blearily. "What? How do you?" Before he could finish, an alarmed shout rang from a guard on the palisade. A distant thump and flash of green fire lit up the night outside the town, one of the traps detonating. Then came the chorus of undead groans and the clatter of bones. The attack was here. Zanz and Eden rushed outside as villagers lit torches and grabbed whatever weapons they could. A handful of shambling figures had triggered the outer traps and now stumbled into view on the road. Some were little more than skeletons draped in scraps of burial cloth, others fresher corpses with limbs stiff from the cold of death. Behind them, more silhouettes emerged from the tree line, perhaps a dozen total. The town guards loosed arrows, and one undead fell, an arrow protruding from its skull. Another trap flared on the eastern flank, engulfing two more ghouls in sanctified flame. Zanz felt relief that their preparations were working, but the attack was not yet thwarted. Several of the dead still advanced. Eden, clutching a crossbow shakily, stayed near the gate. Zanz moved ahead, heart hammering but mind focused. There was no time to question his next action. Tapping into the cold power within, he extended a hand and murmured a guttural phrase he'd practiced quietly in the woods these past mornings. "Serve me." A faint green glow flickered in the eye sockets of one of the closer skeletons, a fallen farmer now risen. The skeleton jerked to a halt mid-stride, bones creaking. Zanz strained, pouring his will into the undead creature. With a twisting motion of his wrist, he urged it to turn on its own kind. The skeleton suddenly lunged sideways, tackling a zombie that was lurching toward a guard. Both collapsed into a heap of bones and rotting flesh. Zanz grit his teeth. Controlling even one undead was harder now than it had been with the solitary woodcutter corpse. Perhaps because these were under the influence of someone else's summoning, not just stray undead. His interference was like wrestling for the reins of a maddened horse. One of the remaining ghouls reached the town gate, only to be met by a villager's spear. Another arrow from the guard struck true and dropped the last shambling corpse. The night fell quiet again, save for the crackling of a dying flame from one trap and the panting breaths of frightened but victorious townsfolk. They had repelled the attack with minimal harm. Only one guard was lightly wounded by a raking claw. Zanz released his hold on the skeleton he'd hijacked, letting its bones collapse inert. He sagged against the wall, a wave of nausea and exhaustion from the exertion washing over him. Using the power in a protracted way had drained him and left an oily feeling of dread in his gut. 11 Eden came up beside him, eyes wide. "Zanz, what did you just—" Zanz realized with a jolt that in the chaos, Eden had witnessed him spellcasting at the undead. He wasn't sure how much the alchemist understood of what he saw. Zanz struggled for an explanation. "I learned a few tricks from my mentor. I figured if someone is controlling them, maybe I could disrupt it." It wasn't a complete lie, but not the full truth either. Eden's face slowly shifted from shock to gratitude. "Whatever you did, it helped. You turned one against the others. I didn't know alchemists could do that." "Neither did I," Zanz said with a weak chuckle, deflecting. "Let's just say Ormond was a man of many talents." Before Eden could press further, the town councilor, the same man who had scolded Eden before, approached with a contingent of townsfolk. Instead of anger, his expression was one of astonished relief. Eden, your traps worked! And you, young man, he pointed at Zans, we saw you stand against them like some kind of wizard. Matt Highbrook owes you both a great debt. The counselor was about to loudly praise them to the gathering crowd, but Zans raised his hands humbly. Please, there's no need for fuss. I'm just glad we could help keep you safe. He preferred not to linger in the spotlight. But it might be wise to double the watch for the rest of the night in case there are more out there. Quite right, the counselor nodded, immediately ordering the militia to remain on guard. Within the hour, the excitement died down. The townsfolk returned to their homes, and guards dragged the remains of the undead to a pyre outside the walls, burning them to ash. Back in the quiet of the workshop, Eden bandaged the guard's scratch and then turned to Zans. You're leaving in the morning, aren't you? He asked, not meeting Zans's eyes directly as he tidied scattered tools, a hint of disappointment in his voice. Zans hesitated. I have to reach Greyport and find answers about what's causing all this. He looked at the kindly alchemist. Your town will be all right now, I think. You have defenses and you know what you're up against. Others might not be so prepared. Eden nodded heavily. I won't pry into your business, but if you ever pass through Highbrook again, you'll have a warm meal and a place to stay. And if you uncover anything useful about the undead or necromancers, send word. We'll fight however we can. Zans managed to smile. I will, and thank you for everything. He extended a hand, and Eden shook it firmly. That night, as Eden returned to his slumber, Zans found sleep elusive. He kept thinking of the crow that had watched them earlier, and the sense that the attack was orchestrated, not random. Someone had to be 12 driving these undead assaults, and for what purpose? If he could reach Greyport's archives or find Ormond's contacts, maybe he could begin to piece it together. Quietly, he opened Ormond's journal by candlelight and thumbed through the pages. Amid herbal recipes and scribbled arcane symbols, a pressed violet fell out. The flower Ormond once told him was for remembrance. It brought a lump to Zans's throat, but also steeled his resolve. The mysterious power coursing through him was the key, he was sure of it. He needed to learn to wield it, not just for survival, but to unravel the dark plot that had claimed his village and threatened so many others. By the time the candle burned low, Zans finally drifted into a light sleep, the violet clasped in his hand, and a faint whisper of, "We will find the truth," echoing in his mind. Chapter 10, The Scholar's City. Dawn broke clear and cold over Highbrook. After heartfelt farewells with Eden and a few grateful townsfolk, Zans set off once more on the road toward Greyport. This time he wasn't entirely alone. Perched on his shoulder was the black-feathered crow he had seen the day before. The bird had fluttered down as Zans was leaving, landing on his shoulder as if it had decided to adopt him. It bore a striking resemblance to Ormond's old raven familiar, though that bird had perished alongside its master in Aramor. Whether by coincidence or some lingering bond of necromancy, Zans welcomed the creature's company and named it Nightclaw, after a joke Ormond had once made about his too curious raven. With Nightclaw occasionally taking to the air and scouting ahead, Zans made good progress. The crow's presence proved useful. Twice Nightclaw's harsh cawing warned Zans of danger on the road, allowing him to avoid a broken bridge and later skirt around a pack of wandering ghouls feasting on a deer carcass in a distant field. After another week of travel, the terrain became more populated. He passed larger villages and market towns buzzing with talk of unrest. More stories of graveyards disturbed, a far-off border skirmish rumored to involve unnatural forces, whispers that the king's capital itself was on alert. The world was growing fearful, shadows lengthening under the specter of necromancy. Finally, one crisp afternoon, Zans crested a hill and beheld Greyport. The city sprawled along the banks of a great gray river, its harbor filled with ships. High granite walls encircled clusters of slate-roofed buildings. Rising above them all was a majestic tower and domed structure, Greyport's famous Grand Archive and Arcane Academy. Zans's heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nervousness as he approached the gates. This was a hub of knowledge and power. If answers existed anywhere, they would be here. However, big cities also meant tighter scrutiny. With the king's notice about necromancers, Greyport might be watchful for strangers with magic. He would need to tread carefully. At the city gates, guards were stopping travelers and wagons for inspection. Zans queued up behind a peddler's cart. When his turn came, a guard eyed his rough attire and staff. "Purpose in Greyport?" the guard asked tersely. 13 research, Zans replied truthfully. "I'm a student, hoping to study at the archives." The guard's stern expression softened marginally at the mention of study. He motioned to a clerk with a ledger who took down Zans's name and origin. Zans provided the alias he'd used before and claimed to be from a small town west of here. No one notable. Satisfied, they let him through after a brief check of his satchel, where Ormond's journal and the violet remained tucked safely out of sight beneath clothes and herbs. Inside, Greyport bustled with life. Cobblestone streets thronged with merchants, sailors, scholars in robes, and soldiers in polished armor. Amid the crowd, Zans felt both anonymous and exposed. Nobody knew him, which was good, but he also had no idea where to begin. He decided his first stop should be the Arcane Academy's outer offices, where one might inquire about admissions or visiting scholars. With some directions from a friendly fruit vendor, he navigated the winding streets toward the great tower he'd seen. Let me know when you're ready with the next part. Let me know when you're ready with the next part. But necromancy, that I'm learning on my own now. Keldron tapped his chin. The academy could use someone with field experience. Most of our students have never seen a walking corpse, except in textbooks. If Ormond trusted you with knowledge, that speaks volumes. He stood, searching a shelf until he pulled out a thick volume. Entrance exams be damned. We're in a crisis. I will sponsor you as a visiting apprentice researcher. You'll help us compile any intelligence on these attacks, and in return you get access to our library and resources. Do we have a deal? Relief and gratitude flooded Zans. Yes, Master Keldron. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Keldron said wryly. The work ahead will be tough and dangerous. Now let's get you quartered. You look like you could use a decent meal and rest. Over the next hour, Master Keldron introduced Zans to a flurry of new faces and places. The apprentice dormitories, where he was given a small chamber, the dining hall, and most importantly, the Grand Archive. An immense library whose vaulted ceilings and endless shelves made Zans's heart race with excitement. Even Nightclaw, who trailed inconspicuously overhead, gave a caw that echoed in the grand hall, earning a few amused looks from robed scholars. By the time night fell, Zans lay in a real bed in the quiet academy dorm, physically tired but mentally invigorated. He now had what he needed, access to knowledge and a safe harbor, at least for now. Yet he knew he must be cautious. While Keldron seemed an ally, others at the academy might not be so understanding if they discovered the true source of Zans's abilities. As he drifted to sleep, one thought lingered. Somewhere in these archives could be the key to understanding Ormond's gift and the identity of the necromancers orchestrating the undead scourge. He was closer than ever to the answers he sought, and with each passing day, Zans Vara was growing stronger and wiser for the battles yet to come. Chapter 11. Secrets in the Stacks. In the days following his induction as a provisional apprentice, Zans immersed himself in Greyport's Grand Archive. He spent hours in the library's hushed halls under flickering lamplight, poring over scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Master Keldron had given him a broad mandate: gather anything related to necromancy, undead armies, or past incursions. The task was daunting. Entire shelves were dedicated to the dark arts and their historical manifestations, but Zans attacked it with fervor. One afternoon, as he squinted at an ancient chronicle of the War of Blackbone, an uprising of necromancers a century past, a gentle voice interrupted his concentration. "Mind if I join you?" A young woman with auburn hair and ink-stained fingers stood across the table, several hefty books in her arms. She wore an apprentice's robe similar to Zans's. Zans offered a polite nod, wary yet glad for the company. Of course. She set down her volumes with a thump. "Researching the undead, too? I've seen you buried in these sections all week." "Yes," Zans replied carefully. "Master Keldron has me compiling references. It's personal as well. I lost my home to an undead attack." Her green eyes softened. "I'm sorry. I'm Odelia. My older brother was slain by a ghoul 2 months ago while stationed on the northern border. That's why I'm studying this. I want to help stop whatever is causing these abominations. A shared sadness passed between them. Zans realized he felt at ease with Odelia. Her earnest determination mirrored his own. I'm Zans, he introduced. My mentor was, he hesitated, Orman. 16 Odelia's eyes widened in recognition. The Orman who wrote Treatise on Mortuous Alchemy? I read excerpts in class. He posited that necromancy could be countered with certain alchemical reagents. That was radical thinking. Zans smiled faintly, surprised and proud to hear Orman's work mentioned. That sounds like him. He believed knowledge should be used creatively to solve problems. As they talked, Odelia helped Zans sift through texts. She pointed out key passages with an excited fervor. Together, they uncovered troubling patterns. References to an ancient necromancer king named Azrathene, defeated long ago, whose followers attempted to resurrect him multiple times throughout history. Whispers of a secret cabal called the Ebon Circle infiltrating courts of kings. Accounts of entire villages vanishing in plagues of undeath during previous eclipses. Zans felt a chill. An eclipse, there's one due next spring, isn't there? He recalled from an almanac. Odelia nodded gravely. Yes. If these cultists operate by celestial events, the coming eclipse could be when they try something truly catastrophic. Their research was interrupted when a loud voice boomed across the library hall. Zans! There you are. A tall young man in fine silk robes strutted over. His blond hair was tied back, and a jeweled dagger hung at his belt, a mark of a noble. Zans had seen him in passing. He was one of the more advanced students. The newcomer eyed Odelia briefly, then fixed a cold smile on Zans. I'm Thalon of House Merrick. I hear Master Keldrin plucked you from the streets and set you to our work. Quite a charity case. Zans bristled at the condescension, but kept his tone civil. I'm here to help, same as you. Thalon smirked. We'll see. Keldrin may trust you, but some of us wonder what skills a vagrant apprentice brings to necromancy research. Perhaps you'd care to demonstrate in the dueling court tomorrow? A friendly bout, purely educational, of course. Zans realized this was less an invitation and more a challenge. Around them, a few other students looked up from their books, sensing brewing drama. Odelia frowned at Thalon. The last thing we need is infighting, Thalon. Save the duels for another time. On the contrary, Thalon drawled, if he's to work with us, I'd like to see how he handles a wand. Or will you hide behind dusty tomes forever, Zans? Heat rose in Zans's cheeks, but he checked his anger. A scene here would do no good. Instead, he met Thalon's gaze evenly. If Master Keldrin permits, I'll spar with you, but only after today's work is done. We have real enemies to worry about. Thalon's smile tightened at the rebuke. Very well, tomorrow at noon. With that, the noble student turned on his heel and strode away. After he left, Odelia shook her head. Pay him no mind. Thalon's only skill is self-importance. 17 exhaled slowly, the tension easing. I can handle a duel. I just need to be careful. I can't exactly use my, full talents in front of an audience. Odelia tilted her head, curious at his wording, but did not press. If you need a second, I'll be there for support. And I might have a few tricks up my sleeve to help. Grateful, Zans nodded. Thank you, Odelia. They returned to their studies, but Zans's mind was already drifting to the coming duel. He had little formal training in the academy style of spellcasting. Relying on necromancy openly was out of the question. Raising a skeleton in a duel would cause panic. He'd have to rely on cunning and whatever basic elemental spells Orman had taught him. Perhaps a dash of alchemy as well. As he closed a tome on protective wards against the undead, Zans allowed himself a thin, dark-humored smile. Facing entitled bullies isn't what I expected in the fight against darkness, he mused to Odelia, who chuckled softly. But if it quiets his ego, maybe I'll consider it a public service. Tomorrow would be an interesting day. Chapter 12, Trial by Fire. The winter sun hung low but bright as noon approached, and a small crowd gathered in the academy's dueling courtyard. Word of the challenge between Thalon Merrick and the new apprentice from the streets had spread, and a mix of students and a few instructors ringed the practice grounds. Some wore skeptical looks as they regarded Zans. Others whispered that Thalon rarely issued challenges he wasn't sure to win. Zans stood at one end of the sandy arena, heart thumping steadily. Odelia was beside him, adjusting a small satchel at his belt that contained a few quick alchemical concoctions they prepared that morning. Remember, she murmured, you've got that flash powder if he corners you, and the tincture on your sleeve will resist heat for a short time. He nodded appreciatively. They had anticipated that Thalon, known for fire magic, would likely try to overwhelm him with flashy spells. Zans wore a long-sleeved leather jerkin beneath his robe, quietly coated in a potion that would shield him from burns briefly. It wouldn't make him immune, but might turn a deadly flame into a mere singe. At the opposite end, Thalon flourished an engraved wand and donned a confident grin. A stern proctor, a battle magic instructor, stepped forward. This is a supervised sparring match. First to yield or to be unable to continue loses. No spells intended to maim. Understood? Both duelists inclined their heads. Zans gripped Ormond's wooden staff. He'd opted to use it instead of a wand, feeling more comfortable with its weight. Begin, the proctor announced. 18 Thalon wasted no time. With a sharp incantation, he sent a trio of flaming orbs streaking through the air toward Zans, leaving trails of smoke. Zans sidestepped one, blocked another by raising his staff. The orb splashed harmlessly against a quick ward Odelia had woven into the wood that morning, and ducked the third. The crowd murmured at his nimbleness, but Thalon was just warming up. "Try this!" Thalon shouted. He slammed his wand down and a gout of fire erupted from the ground, a blazing serpent racing along the sand. Heat rolled over Zans as the flame serpent lunged. Zans drew on a simple trick Ormond had taught him for dousing campfires. With a sweep of his hand, he channeled a minor gust of wind. The flame serpent scattered into embers under the disruptive blast of air, drawing a surprised murmur from the onlookers. Thalon's eyes narrowed. With a flurry of motion, he conjured a crackling whip of fire in one hand and advanced. Zans was forced on the defensive, parrying strikes with his staff as the fiery lash snapped and sparked. Each impact showered him with embers, but the potion on his jerkin kept his skin unscorched, to Thalon's visible frustration. "Stand still, you wretch!" Thalon snarled, striking harder. It was clear he hadn't expected a mere charity case to last this long. Zans felt the potion's protective coolness waning as the heat seeped through. He needed to change the tide. Feinting a stumble, he retreated a few steps. Thalon took the bait, stepping forward and raising his wand for a larger spell, likely a finisher. Now, Zans flicked his free hand to his belt, crushing a packet of flash powder Odelia had prepared. He flung the powder at Thalon's feet, and a blinding bang of light and smoke exploded. Thalon yelped, staggering back, his spell disrupted as the crowd gasped and shielded their eyes. Zans surged through the haze, swinging his staff low. The blow caught Thalon behind the knees, sweeping his legs out from under him. The noble crashed onto his back in the sand, wand flying from his hand. In an instant, Zans planted the tip of his staff at Thalon's throat. When the smoke cleared, the audience saw Thalon prone and disarmed, Zans standing over him with a decidedly non-magical end to the duel. "Yield," Zans said firmly, breathing hard. Face red with humiliation and rage, Thalon glared up at him. For a moment, Zans thought he might be foolish enough to refuse, but then the proctor cleared his throat pointedly. "The match is decided." "I yield," Thalon spat, eyes downcast. Zans immediately withdrew his staff and offered a hand to help Thalon up, a gesture of sportsmanship. Thalon slapped it away and got to his feet on his own, brushing sand from his robes. "You got lucky, peasant," he hissed under his breath so only Zans could hear. "This proves nothing." With that, Thalon snatched up his wand and stalked off, 2 of his cronies trailing after him. A few spectators clapped, including Odelia, who ran up beaming. "Well done. That was some clever footwork." One of the instructors gave Zans an approving nod. "Creative use of materials, and restraint too. I've seen Thalon take worse thrashings, but you kept it civilized." Zans bowed his head modestly, relief flooding him. "Thank you. I only defended myself." As the crowd dispersed, a figure approached that Zans did not expect, Master Keldrin. The older mage had apparently observed from the sidelines, arms crossed. "Walking off already, Zans? I'd like a word." Odelia squeezed Zans's arm encouragingly and stepped away to give them privacy. Zans faced Keldrin, unsure if he was about to be reprimanded for the spectacle. "Master?" Keldrin's lips twitched into a slight smile. "Impressive display. Ormond would be proud of your ingenuity. Though next time, perhaps avoid using half the alchemy lab's inventory in a single duel." His tone was teasing. Zans allowed himself a grin. "I'll try, sir." Keldron's expression grew more serious. In truth, I'm glad to see you can handle yourself. We may soon have need of those skills. We've received a message from the palace. An envoy from Thalarion is arriving tomorrow for talks. Given the rumors from that kingdom, the Academy has been asked to discreetly keep an eye on the proceedings. Zan straightened, all ears. Thalarion, that's one of the kingdoms to the east, right? I've read they sealed their borders recently. Indeed. King Draven's court, whispers say his new Grand Vizier holds unusual sway and that dark creatures have been sighted near their border. This envoy's sudden visit is suspicious. Keldron lowered his voice. I'm assigning a few of my apprentices to assist the city guard in watching for any magical mischief during the envoy's stay. I'd like you and Odelia among them. Zans felt a mix of pride and trepidation. Of course, Master. We'll be vigilant. Keldron nodded. Report to the east gate tomorrow morning. And Zans, he placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, be careful. If the enemy is moving openly, Greyport could become a target. Trust your instincts. As Keldron left, Zans exhaled, his thoughts already racing ahead. The envoy's arrival could be the breakthrough they needed, confirmation of the corrupted kingdom's involvement, perhaps even a chance to confront an agent of the necromancers directly. Dark humor flickered in his mind. Facing undead horrors instead of arrogant classmates would be a welcome change of pace. He found Odelia waiting for him by the arcade. What did Keldron say? She asked. 20, we have a mission, Zan said, excitement and concern tinging his voice. Keep your potions handy. Tomorrow we might deal with real danger. Odelia's eyes lit up with determination. I'll be ready. As Zans walked off to rest, Nightclaw fluttered down from a nearby rooftop to perch on his shoulder. The crow cawed softly, as if sensing the coming challenge. Zans reached up to stroke its feathers, steel in his heart. Tomorrow, he whispered to his companion, we'll see what secrets this envoy brings. Chapter 13. The Envoy's Deception. Dawn's light found Greyport bustling with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The Thalarion envoy was due within the hour, and the city guard had doubled at the eastern gate. Rumors abounded in the streets. Some thought the envoy brought news of an alliance against the undead. Others whispered that he was here to spy, or, worse, to deliver an ultimatum from a corrupt king. Zans and Odelia waited in the shadow of a column at the Eastgate courtyard, clad in academy cloaks. Master Keldron had placed them under the leadership of Sir Kinnick, a knight captain of the city watch. Kinnick was a grizzled man with a scar across his nose, and he had given the apprentices simple orders. Observe and report anything unusual while the envoy was in town, but do not interfere unless signaled. Trumpets sounded, and the gates opened to admit the visitors. Zans watched intently as a small procession rode in on horseback. At the front was an imposing figure in ornate black and silver armor, clearly the envoy. He dismounted with the practiced grace of a warrior. His face was obscured by a hood, but when he pushed it back, Zan saw a pale, clean-shaven man in his 30s with sharp cheekbones and unsettlingly dark eyes. There was something about those eyes that made Zan's necromantic senses prickle. They were too dull, almost lifeless, despite the man being very much alive. Behind the envoy came a retinue of 5 soldiers in similar black livery, and, notably, a tall figure draped in heavy robes who carried a metal casket in his arms. The robed figure's face was hidden by a deep cowl. Sir Kinnick stepped forward to greet the envoy formally. Welcome to Greyport, Lord Ambassador. The council awaits you at the Citadel. The envoy inclined his head politely, but his voice was cold. Thank you, Captain. I trust the arrangements for our stay are adequate? Of course, Kinnick replied. Guards will escort you, if you and your attendants will follow. As the envoy's party moved, Odelia nudged Zans, whispering, Did you feel that? Something's off. Zans had indeed felt it. A faint aura of death as the entourage passed. It seemed to emanate from the robed attendant with the casket. The one with the box, Zans murmured back. He's giving me chills. Nightclaw, from a perch on a nearby ledge, gave a low caw. The crow's feathers were ruffled, another sign that something unnatural was near. 21. Their orders were to shadow discreetly, so Zans and Odelia split up to follow at a distance as the procession headed toward the Citadel in the city's center. Zans took to the arcades that lined the streets, keeping the envoy in sight between pillars, while Odelia drifted along the opposite side, blending with pedestrians. The envoy's group was led into a grand hall, where Greyport's mayor and several council members welcomed them. Zan slipped inside behind a cluster of scribes and servants. The hall was spacious, with columns and a high dome, and currently filled with polite chatter as both sides engaged in diplomatic pleasantries. Zans positioned himself near a side aisle, half hidden behind a marble statue of a past scholar. From here, he could observe both the envoy and his mysterious attendant with the casket. Odelia had circled around to the other side of the hall, doing the same. The envoy launched into a formal greeting. "I bring salutations from His Majesty King Draven of Thalarion," he proclaimed, though his tone was devoid of warmth. He is most appreciative of Greyport's efforts to combat the recent unpleasantness. In fact, he has sent a token of goodwill and cooperation. He nodded to the robed attendant. The attendant stepped forward. A hush fell as he set the metal casket on a table and opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a gleaming object, a chalice of dark glass or crystal etched with strange symbols. One of Greyport's counselors, a mage named Bernholt, leaned in to inspect it. "A curious artifact," Bernholt noted. "What does it do?" The Thalarion envoy gave a thin smile. "It is a relic from our royal crypts, imbued with protective enchantments. Our king offers it as a gift to strengthen Greyport's defenses against necromancy, a gesture of solidarity." Zans frowned. Something about that chalice made the hairs on his neck stand. Protective enchantments? If anything, his gut told him it was the opposite. He noticed the robed attendant's hands trembling slightly as Bernholt reached for the chalice, as if eager, too eager to hand it over. Suddenly, Nightclaw shrieked from the ledge above, the sound echoing through the hall. The abrupt cry startled everyone. Bernholt jerked his hand back from the chalice. The envoy's eyes flashed with annoyance as he looked up at the offending crow. Zans acted on instinct. Taking advantage of the distraction, he reached out with his necromantic sense toward the chalice, probing gently. What he sensed was like a jolt of ice. The chalice was steeped in death magic, a beacon humming with malevolent energy. Far from protective, it felt more like a conduit or a bomb waiting to go off. Across the room, he caught Odelia's gaze. She gave a subtle nod, confirming that she too felt the dark aura now that she was focusing on it. The envoy cleared his throat, regaining attention. "A fine bird," he said with strained politeness, eyeing Nightclaw, who still fluttered agitatedly. "Now, as I was saying, 22. Before he could continue, the hall doors banged open and an out-of-breath city guard rushed in. "Captain Kinnick! News from the harbor!" He trailed off, seeing the formal gathering. Kinnick, tense at the interruption, excused himself from the envoy's side and met the guard near the entrance. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, but Zans, with his heightened senses, caught snippets. "Bodies! Warehouse by docks! Dark magic!" Zans's eyes narrowed. Bodies at the docks? Dark magic? Could it be a diversion or another prong of an attack concurrent with the envoy's visit? He glanced back to the delegation in time to see the robed attendant shifting nervously. The envoy maintained a calm facade, but his fingers flexed as if itching to do something drastic. The council members began to whisper at the guard's intrusion, sensing something amiss. The mayor addressed the guard. "Is it urgent? Speak freely." The guard announced, voice tense. Several corpses were discovered hidden in a warehouse by the harbor. They rose and attacked our men when uncovered. We suspect necromancy, perhaps smuggled into the city. A ripple of alarm went through Greyport's officials. The envoy held up his hands. "My condolences. We had nothing to do with that, I assure you." His voice was silky, placating. Zans, however, connected the dots. The warehouse incident must be linked. A smuggled undead force ready to sow chaos. And here in the hall, a sinister artifact being gifted likely as a Trojan horse, perhaps to subvert Greyport's wards or even harm the council once activated. He made a split-second decision. Breaking from his cover, Zan stepped forward and addressed Sir Kinnick and the assembled council. "Captain, that chalice is a trap!" All eyes turned to Zans in astonishment. Thalon, lurking among the onlookers, gasped, "He's interrupting a state meeting." But Zans pressed on, pointing at the artifact. "I sense necromancy in it. It's no protective charm. It's probably meant to do the opposite." Murmurs erupted. Bernholt the mage frowned deeply and looked to Kinnick. The envoy's face darkened. "This is outrageous. "Who is this stripling to slander our gift?" he snapped. Sir Kinnick stepped towards the chalice, wary. He knew Zans was part of Keldron's assigned watchers, and thus likely not speaking idly. "Master Bernholt, can you verify?" Bernholt carefully extended a hand over the chalice, murmuring a detection incantation. Immediately his eyes widened. "There's a curse bound in this object," he exclaimed. The room erupted into chaos. Kinnick drew his sword. "Seize the envoy and his attendant!" 23. But the moment the ruse was exposed, the Thalarian party dropped all pretenses. The robed attendant reached inside his cloak and flung out a handful of dark powder, shouting guttural words. A wave of necromantic energy surged. The guard beside him collapsed lifelessly, his life force sucked out in an instant. The attendant's robe fell away to reveal a gaunt man with ritual scarifications, a necromancer in disguise. The envoy himself uttered a sharp whistle and from beneath his armor pulled a slender blade. His eyes Zan saw now in horror that they glowed faint green. The envoy was no living man at all, but a corpse puppeted by foul magic. As council members scrambled back in terror, two of the envoy's soldiers lunged to protect their master, clashing with city guards. The remaining three soldiers, Zans noticed with dread, moved in unnatural unison in silence. They were more undead thralls. Sir Kinnick engaged the undead envoy, steel ringing on steel. The false envoy was preternaturally strong, pushing the captain back. The necromancer attendant, meanwhile, advanced toward Bernholt and the mayor, trying to reach the chalice. Zans acted swiftly. He sprinted toward the table with the chalice, meeting the necromancer halfway. The gaunt man snarled and raised a hand wreathed in sickly green fire. Before he could release the spell, a bolt of crackling blue energy struck his shoulder, Odelia, from across the room, launching a lightning dart. It staggered the necromancer, buying Zans an opening to swing Ormon's staff. The blow cracked across the necromancer's temple, sending him reeling. Across the hall, Kinnick was trading blows with the undead envoy, and two guards fought the thrall soldiers. One guard went down under a sword thrust, prompting Nightclaw to dive-bomb the attacker's head with furious cause. A minor distraction, but enough for another guard to run the thrall through. Zans reached the chalice. Unsure how to neutralize it, he did the simplest thing. He tipped the casket and wrapped the chalice in its velvet lining, stifling whatever influence it emanated. The mayor and council had fled behind a column, out of immediate harm's way. The necromancer attendant recovered from the blow and grabbed Zans by the throat with surprising speed. His touch burned with cold energy, siphoning Zans's strength. "Meddling whelp," he hissed, eyes sunken and furious. Zans gagged, vision swimming as necrotic chills spread through him. Desperate, he summoned his own necromantic power internally, pushing back against the drain. It became a contest of wills, Zans channeling life force from within to repel the attacker's grip. For a moment, the necromancer's eyes widened in surprise at encountering a fellow practitioner's resistance. With a surge, Zans broke the hold, shoving the necromancer backward with an invisible blast of force, born of death magic. The gaunt man crashed into the table, cracking it. Before Zans could follow up, a piercing scream split the air. He turned to see Kinnick disarmed and on his knees, the envoy's blade run through the captain's shoulder. The envoy twisted his sword, cruelly preparing a finishing strike. 24 Zans didn't think. He reacted. With a snap of his fingers, he directed a fragment of his power at the fallen guard who had died by the necromancer's spell. "Rise," he commanded silently. The dead guard spasmed, then lurched up from the floor behind the envoy, grabbing at his legs. The envoy, caught off guard, stumbled just as he was about to deliver the killing blow to Kinnick. The undead guard's intervention gave Kinnick the moment he needed. The captain seized his dropped dagger and plunged it upward into the envoy's chest, finding the heart that, dead or not, still caused the puppet to shudder and collapse. Zans immediately released the guard's corpse, letting it fall lifeless once more. He hoped in the chaos no one noticed exactly what had happened. The last of the thrall soldiers had been cut down by city guards, and the necromancer attendant, seeing his plan unravel, scrambled to flee. He hurled one more spell, a cloud of noxious darkness that spread through the entrance of the hall, then dashed through a side door behind the dais. Odelia and Zans converged at Kinnick's side. The captain was grimacing in pain, but alive. "Go!" he grunted, nodding after the necromancer. Don't let him escape. Zans didn't need further urging. With Odelia close behind, he raced through the side door into a corridor. Master Keldrin had placed them under the leadership of Sir Kinnick, a knight captain of the City Watch. Kinnick was a grizzled man with a scar across his nose, and he had given the apprentices simple orders. Observe and report anything unusual while the envoy was in town, but do not interfere unless signaled. Trumpets sounded, and the gates opened to admit the visitors. 26 Zans glanced at Kinnick, who was being helped up, wincing but alive. I'm just glad we caught it in time. Kinnick overheard and added gruffly, The lad saved my life too, though I'm not entirely sure how. The captain's eyes searched Zans's. Zans held his breath, uncertain if Kinnick had realized about the corpse intervention, but Kinnick merely nodded in respect. Greyport is in your debt. Thalon, lingering near the doorway with a sullen expression, looked like he wanted to protest the praise Zans was receiving, but wisely kept silent given the circumstances. As the hall began to clear and healers tended to the wounded, Keldrin drew Zans and Odelia aside. This attack confirms our suspicions. Necromancers have entrenched themselves in Thalarion's court. Perhaps King Draven is their puppet. The eclipse we read about, whatever they plan, it likely centers there. Zans thought of the ancient war chronicles and felt that same chill. Azrathine, he murmured. If they're trying to resurrect an ancient necromancer king, an eclipse could be key. They needed Greyport out of the way or under their control to free their flank. Odelia's eyes shone with urgency. We have to stop them at the source. Keldrin nodded gravely. I will petition the council and our king to sanction a mission. We can't send an army into Thalarion without provocation, but a small party might slip in to gather evidence or sabotage their efforts. He placed a hand on Zan's shoulder. I know I'm asking a lot, but you know more about this threat than anyone now. Will you lead this task? Zans didn't hesitate. Yes. The finality in his own answer surprised him, but he felt a fierce resolve. This was what Ormond's gift was meant for. He was sure of it now, to confront the darkness at its heart. Take a day to rest and prepare, Keldrin said. Choose whom you'd have accompany you. I'll arrange what supplies I can, potions, amulets, anything to help you travel undetected. He gave Zans a proud, sad smile. You've grown, Zans. Ormond would be proud. Zans felt a swell of emotion at that, but he buried it down. There was too much work to do. We'll leave at first light the day after tomorrow. As the apprentices left the citadel, Nightclaw circling overhead, Zans allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He turned to Odelia with a wry smile. I suppose that duel with Thalon was good practice after all. He just didn't hit as hard as a falling bookshelf. Odelia laughed softly, a sound of light amidst the gloom. Next time we face a necromancer attack, I'll be sure to push a shelf on them. Zans chuckled, then gazed eastward towards the unseen lands of Thalarion. We stopped this wave, but the war's just beginning. 27 in the gathering twilight, the two walked back toward the academy to ready themselves, dark cloaks drawn tight against the chill. The real journey into the heart of a corrupted kingdom awaited, and Zanzvara would meet it head-on. Chapter 14, Sanctum of Sacrifice. Zans and Odelia left Greyport at dawn 2 days later, slipping out with little fanfare. With them rode Sir Galen Torek, whom Keldrin had arranged to accompany as a representative of Aurelia's crown. Galen had eagerly volunteered. The knight felt duty-bound to confront the evil festering in Thalarion. Rounding out their company was Jory, the burly rebel from Crowford, who had arrived in Greyport the day after the envoy incident, bearing news of unrest beyond the border. His insight and knowledge of the terrain would be invaluable. They traveled east under wintry skies, each bearing false papers identifying them as a merchant group, covered across into Thalarion unnoticed. Their journey was tense but uneventful for the first few days. Whenever they passed others on the road, Zans and Odelia kept their hoods low and let Galen, posing as a traitor, do the talking. As they neared Thalarion's border, the atmosphere changed. Abandoned farmsteads dotted the countryside. In one hamlet they passed, burned-out cottages and hastily dug graves bore silent witness to an undead attack. Jory's face grew stony at the sight. It was near dusk on the 5th day when they encountered the first patrol. They had chosen a lesser-used woodland path to cross into Thalarion, hoping to avoid notice, but Nightclaw's warning call alerted them moments before 3 riders in black surcoats emerged from the trees ahead. Galen rode forward calmly, hailing them. "Good evening, sirs," he called in a friendly tone. "We are simple merchants heading to Crowford with winter supplies." The patrol's leader, a stern man with hollow cheeks, looked them over. "Crowford is closed to trade," he said flatly. "By order of the king. Turn back." Galen feigned surprise. "Closed? That's unfortunate. But we've come so far. Perhaps a small toll could allow passage?" He subtly reached into a pouch, suggesting a bribe. The patrolman's eyes flicked to Galen's gloved hand, then to Zan's and the others. Zan's tensed. Something about the man's gaze reminded him of the envoy's lifeless eyes. "Show me your papers," the patrolman demanded. Galen complied, handing over their forged documents. The man scanned them, frowning. Nightclaw let out an uneasy croak. Zan sensed a glimmer of necromantic taint. One of these riders was not truly alive. The patrolman's lip curled. "These seem in order, but as I said, no entry. There have been plagues in Crowford. For your own safety, travelers." His tone was disconcertingly devoid of concern. 28 before Galen could reply, Jory spurred his horse forward astride. "Plagues? Strange. My cousin's in Crowford and sent word only of soldiers, not sickness." His eyes bore into the patrolman's, a risky provocation. The hollow-cheeked man's facade slipped. Annoyance flashed across his face. "Crowford's affairs are no concern of." Suddenly, Nightclaw screeched and dived at one of the other riders, a young soldier who had been inching toward Odelia with a hand on his sword. The crow's talons raked across the man's face, and he howled. To Zan's shock, the soldier's hood fell back to reveal a face half decayed, patches of hair clinging to a skull. An undead thrall masquerading in armor. "Ambush!" Galen shouted as the hollow-cheeked leader drew his sword with preternatural speed. The patrol was not a patrol at all, but a necromancer's ambuscade. The remaining rider flung back his cloak, revealing tattered robes. He began chanting, hands weaving a spell. Zan's reacted on instinct. With a snap of his reins, he launched himself off his horse and leveled Ormond's staff, sending a blast of necromantic force at the chanting rider. Caught off guard, the necromancer's spell fizzled, and he was knocked clean off his saddle. Galen engaged the undead leader, their swords clashing in the snowy dusk. Jory swung his axe at the zombie soldier still shrieking from Nightclaw's attack, cleaving into its neck. The thing gurgled and fell, twitching. Odelia raised her palm, and a lance of ice shot forth, impaling the necromancer through the chest as he struggled to rise. His eyes went wide, a final wheeze escaping his lips as the life or unlife left him. Seeing his allies dispatched, the hollow-cheeked swordsman broke away from Galen and turned to flee into the woods. But Zan's was quicker. With a focused push of his will, he seized hold of the fleeing thrall's lifeless mind. "Stop!" The undead man froze mid-step, quivering as Zan's power contested whatever command drove him. Galen wasted no time. He rushed forward and slammed his pommel into the thrall's skull with all his might. The corpse crumpled, whatever magic animating it finally snuffed by damage and Zan's interference. Panting clouds of breath in the cold air, the four regrouped. Nightclaw settled on Zan's shoulder once more, feathers puffed with pride. "So much for stealth," Odelia said wryly, lowering her hood. Galen frowned down at the fallen necromancer's body. They were waiting for travelers, maybe specifically for us. Malachi might know we're coming. 29 Jory wiped undead ichor from his axe. "Crowford's in trouble, that confirms it. If patrols are waylaying any who approach, by the light, what have they done to my town?" His voice shook with anger and worry. Zan's nudged the necromancer's corpse with his boot, noting a peculiar tattoo on the man's wrist, a crescent moon engulfing a skull. The same symbol from the king's notice in Lothaven and the cult they'd foiled in Greyport. "Our enemy is thorough. We should assume Malachi and his cult will try to stop us at every turn." He looked at each of them. "From here on, we travel by night and off the roads. We can't afford more encounters. We head to Crowford to find the resistance, if any remain, and gather information on the ritual." All agreed. With that, they dragged the bodies off the path and covered them with branches and snow to avoid immediate discovery. Their tracks they swept with pine boughs as best they could. It would have to do. When darkness fell fully, the party set out cross-country, guided by Jory's knowledge of the terrain, and what occasional directions Nightclaw seemed to give with a well-timed caw. The crow, it appeared, had a knack for choosing the least trodden yet navigable routes, as if sensing where human or undead eyes might watch. By dawn of the next day, they crested a ridge overlooking Crowford, and Zan's heart sank. Smoke rose from parts of the town, and even at a distance, they could see shambling figures moving within the perimeter. The king's banner of a silver raven on black flew over the watchtower, but the streets seemed devoid of normal town life. They decided to camp in the hills and observe by daylight, then approach at dusk when their chances might be better. Through Galen's spyglass, they took shifts watching Crowford's fate unfold. It was grim. Bodies hung from the old walls, wagons of what looked like villagers being herded out by soldiers towards the Capitol Road, and at night, the unsettling green glows of necromantic rituals flickering in the town square. Jory was beside himself with rage and grief. My people, I saw Mara fighting in the mill there, and old Ricky on the barricade earlier. They're still resisting. His voice was hopeful one moment, despondent the next. But they'll be slaughtered if we don't move soon. They couldn't wait any longer. Under cover of the second night since their arrival, Zan's group descended toward Crowford. If any resistance fighters remained, they would need to link up and fast. By midnight, they had slipped through a gap in the old town wall that Jory knew about, near an overgrown cemetery. The sights and smells were stomach-turning, signs of recent battle and massacre everywhere. They moved in shadows, avoiding patrols of soldiers and undead alike, until they reached the burnt shell of a granary where Jory whispered some survivors might hide. 30 sure enough, behind a collapsed beam, they found a secret cellar entrance. A wary whisper challenged them. After a tense exchange of code phrases, Calder's crow medallion proved their good intentions. They were allowed within. Inside huddled a handful of exhausted rebels, Jory's companions from Crowford and a few from Blackbriar who had escaped the purge there. Relief and determination lit their faces as they recognized Jory and heard that help had come. Plans were made swiftly. Zan's learned that Malachi's forces in Crowford were rounding up people to take to the capital, for what dark purpose they could guess. Some townsfolk were still in hiding or fighting in pockets, but it was only a matter of time. Zan's presented the idea that they must reach the capital quickly, possibly ahead of the captives, to sabotage the ritual. A bold suggestion was made: create a large enough diversion or uprising in Crowford to occupy Malachi's troops while Zan's core group slips away to Ebonfort, the capital. The rebels, even reduced in number, were eager to strike a blow. It was agreed. At first light, they would rally whoever they could and attack the occupiers in Crowford, free as many prisoners as possible. Amid the chaos, Zan's, Odelia, Galen, and Jory would cut through and ride with a few swift horses straight towards the capital to stop Malachi once and for all. It was a desperate plan, but all they had. Before dawn, Zan's took a brief moment alone. In the quiet cellar corner, he clutched Ormond's journal and the violet within. "If you're watching, Master, give me strength for this," he whispered. Nightclaw perched on a rafter above, a silent sentinel. When morning's gray light crept into the shattered streets of Crowford, a cry went up. For Crowford! For Thalarion! As rebels launched their attack from multiple points, torches and arrows flying. The battle for Crowford had begun. Zan's found himself amid the melee, fighting side by side with Galen and Jory, tearing through a knot of shambling undead that guarded the makeshift pen of captives in the town square. Odelia stood back, unleashing spell after spell to break the wards a necromancer had cast over the pen. The confusion was total. Freed villagers fled or joined the fray with whatever they could grab. Black-armored soldiers scrambled as fires sprang up all over town. Eden's traps came in handy here. The rebels had replicated them and set them off to sow panic among the enemy. Zan's, spotting what looked like the last group of prisoners being forced toward a gate, signaled to his companions. Time to go! They had done what they could here. Now they had to press on to the heart of the evil. With a dozen rebel volunteers on horseback covering their retreat, Zan's, Odelia, Galen, and Jory galloped out of Crowford, chasing the dust of Malachi's wagon train full of captives which had left not an hour before amid the chaos. Nightclaw soared overhead, leading the way as if drawn by destiny toward Ebonfort. 31 behind them, Crowford's bells rang out in alarm and triumph mingled, a town burning, but its spirit unbowed. Ahead of them, the distant spires of Thalarion's capital clawed at a sky growing darker by the day as the eclipse neared. Zan's stomach tightened at the thought of what awaited there. Malachi, the cult, and possibly something far worse stirring from ancient slumber. He reached into his satchel and touched Ormond's journal, reassuring himself that knowledge and memory rode with them. "Hold on a little longer, everyone," he whispered, unsure if he meant his companions, the captives, or the world at large. "We're coming." With that silent vow, Zanzvara set his eyes on the horizon and urged his steed faster, determined to deliver Thalarion from its gathering darkness or die trying. Chapter 15. Into the East. True to their plans, Zans and his chosen companions departed the ruins of Crowford at first light after the battle. The morning air was crisp and biting, carrying the mingled scents of ash and pine as they rode eastward. The captives they had freed who could travel followed under Jory's rebel volunteers' protection, heading for the Aurelia border in safety. But Zan's smaller band galloped ahead, hot on the trail of Malachi's wagon train of prisoners bound for the capital. They rode in grim silence. Zan's mind spun with dark possibilities of what Malachi intended for those hapless souls, mass sacrifice during the eclipse, no doubt to fuel Azrathan's return. Each moment counted. Nightclaw flew above, occasionally swooping down to caw and spur them onward, or guide them around a patrol. The Crow's uncanny senses and the chaos sown by the Crowford uprising allowed them to bypass or outrun most enemy scouts. By midday, they entered the rocky highlands surrounding Ebonfort. The capital's black walls loomed on the horizon, and the land bore signs of Malachi's blight. Fields left barren, forests unnaturally quiet, an abandoned village whose inhabitants had likely been recruited for the necromancer's designs. Galen reined in as they reached a vantage point on a ridge. Below, a column of wagons and soldiers was winding toward the city gates, Malachi's convoy. They were perhaps an hour behind it. Smoke rose lazily from the city and distant horns sounded. Ebonfort was bracing for trouble, perhaps alerted by messengers from Crowford. "We can't just charge the gates," Galen said, catching his breath. They all were weary from the hard ride. Zans agreed. "We need a way inside unnoticed. The catacombs, maybe, or an old sally port." He glanced at Jory, but the rebel shook his head. He'd never been inside Ebonfort. Odelia wiped sweat from her brow. "My magic can glamour us for a short time, but not enough to stroll in casually." 32 Nightclaw landed on a nearby boulder and let out a single sharp caw. The Crow looked at Zans, then flapped toward a rocky gorge east of the city. "I think Nightclaw wants us to follow," Zans said, a spark of hope igniting. Perhaps the Crow had spotted something. They dismounted and led their horses cautiously after Nightclaw, down an overgrown path that clung to the gorge's side. Halfway down, they found it, a partially collapsed culvert, half hidden by brush, from which trickled foul-smelling water. It was one of the old storm drains from the castle above, likely leading to the dungeons or catacombs, the same access point Jory had mentioned back in Greyport. "Good eyes, friend," Zans praised, and Nightclaw ruffled his feathers proudly. They tethered the horses in a sheltered depression and prepared to enter. Galen drew his sword, Odelia readied a small orb of light, and Jory hefted his axe. Zans took a deep breath, summoning his courage and the last reserves of his power. "This is it. Stay close. The eclipse will reach totality within hours. We stop the ritual or—" He didn't finish the thought. They all understood. One by one they slipped into the drain, leaving daylight behind and venturing into the dark heart of Ebonfort. Chapter 16. Crossings and Curses. The interior of the storm drain was cramped and slick with algae. Freezing water rose to their shins as Zans and the others waded forward, hunched under the low ceiling. The tunnel stretched into blackness ahead, angling upward slightly. Their footfalls echoed, too loud for comfort. After several minutes, they reached a rusted iron grate set in the ceiling, an access hatch. Galen climbed the ladder rungs beside it and pressed, but it wouldn't budge. Barred from above, he whispered down. Jory pushed past Zans. "Let me!" He climbed up beside Galen and braced himself. With a soft grunt, he heaved. There was a metallic snap as the old bar or lock gave way. The hatch creaked open into darkness. They emerged into a damp stone chamber lit only by Odelia's faint orb of mage light. It smelled of mildew and something fouler, old blood, fear. Around them stretched row upon row of iron-barred cells, Ebonfort's dungeons. No guards, Odelia noted, voice hushed. That made sense. Malachi likely emptied the dungeons for his purposes and saw little need to post men here. As they moved through the corridors of the dungeon, Nightclaw flew ahead, his black form barely visible as he scouted. Twice the crow returned, tugging at Zan's sleeve to warn of guards patrolling intersecting hallways. They avoided these narrowly, hearts pounding each time. 33 ascending a spiral stair, they found the door to the main castle corridors ajar. Zan's carefully peered through. The ornate Raven throne room lay beyond, and it was a ghastly sight. Black candles burned in a circle around the base of King Draven's throne. The king himself was slumped on the seat, bound with runic chains, conscious but pallid as death. 4 cultists in hooded robes chanted at compass points around him, and Malachi's right-hand necromancer, the gaunt advisor from the envoy group, miraculously still alive, held a curved dagger to Draven's throat, evidently ready to complete a sacrifice when the signal came. Zans felt a surge of anger and nearly rushed in, but Galen grabbed his arm. "We should neutralize them quickly and quietly, if possible," he breathed. They planned swiftly in whispers. Odelia and Zans would target the cultists with spells from the shadows. Galen and Jory would charge the dais to rescue the king and take down the lead necromancer. On Zan's signal, they sprang into action. Odelia muttered an incantation and snapped her fingers. 2 cultists suddenly froze, encased up to their waists in thick ice. Zan simultaneously extended his hand towards another cultist and clenched his fist. Tendrils of shadow surged from the corners of the throne room and wrapped that cultist, muffling his screams as they crushed the life from him. Galen and Jory raced down the center aisle before the remaining cultist or the lead necromancer could react. The cultist hurled a bolt of sickly green magic, but Galen's raised shield deflected it. In 2 strides, Jory was upon that cultist, axe cleaving down to split hood, skull and all. The gaunt necromancer hissed, pressing his blade to Draven's throat enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Back, or the king dies now," he snarled. For a beat, everyone froze. Nightclaw, perched in the rafters, let out a low croak. Zans imagined it encouraging caution. But King Draven, to his credit, mustered a weak laugh. "I am a dead man regardless, cur," he rasped at his captor. "Do as you will. My saviors will avenge me." The necromancer's sunken eyes flared with rage at the defiance. He raised the dagger, intent on finishing Draven at once. An arrow suddenly sprouted from the necromancer's wrist, causing him to howl and drop the blade. From the entryway stood Sir Kennick, wounded but alive, his arm in a sling, crossbow in his good hand. Behind him, a handful of Greyport knights and even Thalon, looking begrudging but resolute, filed in. Reinforcements from Aurelia had arrived at last. Seizing the moment, Galen lunged up the dais and drove his sword through the necromancer's chest. The robed man gasped, then fell limp, finally dispatched. Jory smashed the shackles binding Draven, while Odelia ran to the king's side, healing light already glowing on her hands for his wound. Draven looked up at her and Zan's face etched with gratitude and pain. 34. "It's all right, your majesty," Zan said softly. "We're here." Draven managed a faint smile. "Stop. Malachi, he's in the cathedral," he breathed. Kennick strode forward with Thalon and the knights securing the throne room. "Go, we'll guard the king. Malachi's begun his ritual in the Grand Cathedral. My men saw lights and magic there as we passed. We'll handle things here." There was no time for detailed reunions or questions. Zans clasped Kennick's forearm in thanks. How the captain had recovered and arrived was a story for later. With a parting nod from King Draven, Zans, Odelia, Galen, and Jory rushed through a side passage that led towards the cathedral. Nightclaw took wing and flew ahead down the vaulted corridor. The sounds of unholy chanting grew louder as they neared the cathedral's inner sanctum. An orange glow pulsed from under the great double doors, which were slightly ajar. Screams, both ethereal and very human, intermingled with the droning voices. Zan's heart pounded. This is it. He pushed the door enough to peer through, and his blood went cold. The cathedral's interior was a scene from nightmare. Malachi sat atop a grotesque throne of bones on the altar dais, draped in black robes adorned with crimson sigils. In his hands, he held a large black amulet that pulsed with each chanting phrase. Circles of cultists stood arrayed on the nave floor, which was painted with a massive rune that glowed green. And around the edges, guards forced terrified villagers, prisoners from Crowford, Blackbriar, and elsewhere, to kneel, forming a living boundary of suffering around the ritual. Above, a solar eclipse was in progress. The cathedral's shattered rose window revealed the sun as a wan ring of fire behind the black moon. Totality was minutes away. Malachi's voice echoed through the cavernous space. "O death incarnate Azrathine, take this blood, this life, and be reborn." At that, one of the cultists sliced open the throat of a captive. The man gurgled and fell, his blood flowing along etched channels in the floor toward the central rune. The amulet in Malachi's grasp glowed brighter, and a lance of darkness shot up from it toward the eclipse, a bridge for something to cross. Zans felt nausea and fury in equal measure. They had no more time. He nodded to his friends. "For Ormond, for everyone," he whispered. They burst into the cathedral as one, fanning out. "Malachi!" Zans shouted, voice amplified by his own magic to boom over the chants. "Your reign of terror ends now." Malachi's eyes snapped to them, glowing a poisonous green. A cruel smile twisted his face. "Ah, the prodigal apprentice arrives, and just in time to witness the dawn of the new age." He gestured sharply. From the shadows, a phalanx of undead knights and summoned wraiths emerged, interposing themselves. Odelia hurled bolts of crackling lightning, blasting 2 zombies to dust. Jory barreled into another with his axe, cleaving it head to pelvis. Galen engaged a towering skeletal knight, sword clashing against rusted halberd. Zans fixed his gaze on Malachi. The necromancer lord rose from his throne, still clutching the amulet. The eclipse overhead deepened. A strange twilight filled the cathedral. "You could have been part of this, Zans," Malachi called, almost sad. "Ormond's gift in you would have made a fine addition to our circle. Instead, you squander it playing errand boy for the weak." Zans advanced step by step, parrying a swiping skeleton without even glancing at it. Nightclaw dive-bombed the skull to finish it off. "Ormond gave me this power to protect the weak, not exploit them. That's why you'll never win." Malachi sneered and spread his arms. "I've already won, boy." He pointed to the eclipse. The sun was almost completely obscured. On cue, the cultists began a frenzied chant. "Behold, I summon our undying king." He raised the amulet high. The blood runes around the cathedral flared, and a vortex of swirling black mist coalesced above the altar. Within the vortex, a form took shape, a towering skeletal figure crowned with jagged bone and trailing shadow. Azrathine. The air crackled with dread. Odelia screamed as a wraith got past her guard and raked spectral claws across her back. She collapsed to her knees, shaking. Galen, hearing her cry, turned and smashed the wraith with his shield, dissipating it, but took a slashing wound across his thigh from another undead knight for his trouble. Jory was grappling 2 ghouls at once, his axe lost in one of them while he stabbed the other with a dagger repeatedly. It was chaos, and they were being overwhelmed. Zans realized the ritual was seconds from completion. The Lich was nearly manifest. If it fully arrived, all might be lost. In desperation, Zans dropped his staff and reached both hands out toward the swirling form of Azrathine. He could feel the tether of necromantic energy between Malachi, the amulet, and the emerging Lich. With a roar, Zans gripped that tether through his power and pulled with every ounce of will. Malachi staggered, eyes going wide. "What are you?" he cried, feeling control slipping. The connection between amulet and Lich faltered. Azrathine's half-formed spirit hissed in annoyance, turning its burning gaze on Zans. Zans met the Lich's eyes and for a heartbeat felt his soul lay bare before an ancient malevolence. Cold flooded his limbs as Azrathine's will bore down on him. 36 bow, mortal, the Lich's voice echoed in his mind, a chorus of the dead. "I am eternal." Zans's knees buckled, blood dripped from his nose as he strained against both Malachi's spell and Azrathine's psychic assault. He could not outmatch both at once. His vision dimmed. In that hazy moment he thought he saw Ormond's face in the swirling shadows, not fearful but firm. No, he would not bow. With a final surge, Zans channeled every memory of love and hope, Ormond's sacrifice, Eden's faith, Odelia's friendship, Galen's honor, Jory's loyalty, into a single blast of raw power through the tether. The amulet shattered in Malachi's hand. The necromancer screamed as feedback tore through him, veins of darkness crawling over his skin. The partially manifested lich bellowed in rage as the anchor to the mortal plane broke. Malachi lunged at Zans with a dagger, maddened and desperate. But Nightclaw flew at his face, pecking savagely at his eyes. Malachi swatted the crow aside with a snarl, only for Jory, bloody, one arm hanging limp, to suddenly crash into him from the flank. They went down in a heap. Galen, limping but determined, hobbled to Odelia's side and helped her up. Together they began casting. Odelia conjuring tendrils of light, Galen uttering a prayer. They hurled a combined bolt at Azrathine's flickering form. With the anchor amulet gone and the eclipse passing its peak, the lich was unstable. The bolt of holy light speared through its chest. Azrathine's eyes flared in shock. The towering skeletal figure disintegrated in a thunderous boom, shards of dark energy scattering like meteors through the cathedral's rafters before fading. Malachi saw his grand ritual collapse. "No! No!" he shrieked, clawing his way out from under Jory's weight. His once immaculate robes hung in tatters, his face a mask of hatred and despair. Zans, barely standing, approached the fallen necromancer. "It's over, Malachi. Azrathine is banished. Your army is broken." All around, the remaining undead had indeed collapsed with the lich's sundering. Cultists threw down their knives in surrender, or lay on the ground weeping as their god's voice fell silent in their minds. Malachi's chest heaved. He knelt amid the debris of his ambitions, and for an instant Zans almost pitied him. But then the necromancer's eyes fixed on Zans with crazed resolve. From his sleeve, Malachi slipped a slender stiletto, aiming not at Zans, but hurling it with sudden ferocity at the injured Odelia across the way. Zans's heart lurched. There was no time to shout a warning. Galen saw it at the last second and threw himself in front of Odelia. The blade sunk into the knight's already wounded chest. Galen gasped and fell, and Odelia cried out, catching him. 37 Malachi roared and scrambled toward a fallen sword, intent on claiming at least one life, Zans's, before he was taken. But Jory was faster. With a wordless fury, the rebel tackled Malachi from behind, wrapping one beefy arm around the necromancer's throat and squeezing. Malachi choked, flailing, his fingers inches from the sword. Zans closed the distance. In one motion, he picked up Ormond's fallen staff and drove its end into Malachi's chest with a sickening crunch. The necromancer gurgled, eyes bulging. Jory released him and Malachi slumped to the floor, the fight and life draining out of him in a final, ragged breath. It was done. Zanzvara stood trembling over Malachi's corpse, heart pounding in the sudden stillness. The eclipse light above began to brighten as the moon passed. Sunbeams pierced through the broken windows, illuminating swirling dust in the wide-eyed survivors. Odelia sobbed, both in relief and grief, cradling Galen's limp form as healers. Kennick's knights, who had by now stormed in after subduing the castle, rushed to tend to him. "He's alive," one called after a moment, and Zans felt a great weight lift. Nightclaw fluttered down to Zans's shoulder, nuzzling his cheek softly. Zans reached up and stroked the bird's feathers, his vision blurring with tears he'd held at bay for what felt like ages. Sir Kennick, bloody but victorious, surveyed the scene and then knelt, bowing his head toward Zans in respect. Others followed, surviving villagers, rebel fighters, Greyport mages. In the hush, their silent gratitude was overwhelming. Zans closed his eyes, exhaustion nearly overtaking him. In his mind's eye, he saw Ormond smiling proudly, the villagers of Aramur at peace, and a future opening up free of the necromancer's shadow. A dark, wry thought tickled him, almost making him laugh aloud. He had certainly gotten more than he bargained for when he wished for adventure beyond his village. At least there were no more arrogant dueling partners to worry about, just the small matter of rebuilding a kingdom. He nearly did laugh then, a sound both ragged and joyous. "Zans?" Odelia's voice came gently. She was at his side, arm around Galen, who, though pale, managed a roguish grin of his own. Zans turned to his friends, these comrades who had become dearer than family through their trials, and found himself smiling, a genuine, wide smile. "It's finally over," he said softly. Outside, a new dawn was breaking over Evanfort's battered walls. The nightmare had passed, and though Zans knew there would be much to do, burials, councils, the mending of a broken land, for now, in this golden morning light, he simply allowed himself to feel proud and relieved to be alive. 38 high in the rafters, Nightclaw cawed, a bright triumphant sound that echoed through the once bleak cathedral. Chapter 17. Allies in the Ashes. 1 week later, the kingdom of Thalarion was beginning to heal. Word of Malachi's defeat spread as quickly as news of the undead attacks had, but this time it carried hope. The king was alive and liberated, the cult broken. Neighboring lands sent envoys and aid. Survivors returned to their homes to rebuild under the mild spring sun. In Ebonfort's great hall, King Draven held a ceremony to honor those who had saved the realm. It was a humble affair, so many seats empty where nobles or officials had perished, but the gratitude in the air was palpable. Zan stood among his friends near the throne dais. His academy robes had been mended and cleaned. He looked every bit a young scholar, save for Ormond's oak staff in his hand reminding all of the unconventional path he walked. Nightclaw perched atop a marble bust behind him, drawing amused whispers from courtiers who'd grown accustomed to the odd crow that seemed to guard Zan's faithfully. King Draven, still gaunt but regaining strength, rose to address the hall. "Thalarion owes an unpayable debt to these heroes," he proclaimed, gesturing to Zan's Odilia, Galen, who stood armor-polished and sling discarded, his wounds nearly healed, Jory, freshly bathed but proudly wearing his old militia coat, Sir Kennick, scarred and stiff but upright, and others who had fought in the final battles. They came from different corners of the world, Aurelia, Greyport, Crowford, and beyond, united to end a terrible darkness. He stepped down from the throne, a breach of formality that made his advisors murmur, and approached the group directly. Taking a simple golden pin from his robe, fashioned in the shape of a raven in flight, the symbol of Thalarion, he pinned it to Zan's cloak. "Zanzvara," the king said, eyes warm, "know that you shall always have a home and family in Thalarion. Let all here bear witness to this friend of the realm." A cheer went up. Zans felt his cheeks flush at the attention but accepted the honor with a bow. Similar tokens were given to Odilia, Galen, and the rest. When Draven got to Jory, he paused and spoke louder. "And this man, a humble blacksmith of Crowford, rallied our people when all seemed lost. Jory, I appoint you warden of the East Marches, to oversee Crowford and Blackbriar's rebuilding." Jory's eyes widened, but then a broad, slightly bashful grin split his face. I won't let you down, your majesty." Zans clapped him on the shoulder, delighted to see his friend find a new purpose. After the ceremony, as music and conversation rose in the hall, Zan slipped out onto a balcony for a moment of quiet. Nightclaw followed, alighting on the stone rail. Below, the capital bustled not with fear but with life. Merchants reopened shops, children played in the courtyards, and knights patrolled with relieved ease. Odilia soon joined him, leaning on the balustrade. "You did it," she said softly. 39 shook his head. "We did it." He looked at her, grateful beyond words. "What will you do now?" She smiled. "Keldrin wants me to chronicle all this. I expect I'll be in Greyport for a while, writing and researching. The Academy is calling it the Night of the Black Sun." Zans chuckled. "Dramatic." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. A soft breeze played with Odelia's auburn hair. "I'll miss having you around to trade research notes with," she admitted. "Are you certain you won't come back to Greyport for a time? The archive still holds secrets, you know." Zans looked out at the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills lay Aramore's remains, and beyond them, the world he had yet to explore. "I will return," he said. "One day. But first, there's something I need to do." Odelia nodded, understanding. "Your village." "And beyond," Zans added. "There are other scars left by Malachi, cursed battlefields, restless spirits, stray undead. I can sense them, and maybe I can help put them to rest." He had spoken of this plan to no one yet, but Odelia's knowing smile told him she'd already guessed it. "The wandering necromancer, champion of the people," she teased lightly. "They'll spin legends about you, Zans. You realize that?" He laughed quietly. "I suppose dark humor and raising the occasional skeleton to fix a problem might make for a good fireside tale." They shared a warm look. Then Odilia stepped closer and, taking Zans by surprise, gave him a quick, tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for inspiring me and saving me more than once." Zans returned the embrace gently. "Take care of yourself, Odilia. We'll meet again." Nightclaw cawed approvingly as Odilia left to rejoin the festivities. Galen was next to find Zans on the balcony, walking with only a slight limp now. The night breathed in the fresh air and sighed contentedly. Beautiful day, isn't it? It is, Zans agreed. So, Master Vara, Galen said in a mock formal tone, might want a position in the king's service? We could use a mage with your ingenuity in the royal guard. You'd have a knighthood, land, a salary. Zans shook his head with a smile. That's generous, Galen, truly. But no, courts and titles, it's not for me. Not yet, at least. 40 Galen chuckled. I thought as much. The open road calls, eh? He extended his hand. Just know that if you ever need a comrade in arms, I'll come riding. By the sun, you're stuck with me for life after what we went through. Zans clasped the knight's forearm firmly. Likewise, Sir Galen. Try to keep the Larian out of too much trouble while I'm away. Galen grinned. No promises. With a wink, he headed back inside, where Jory was already flagging him down to join a drinking contest with Kinnick. Finally alone, Zans gazed out one last time at the Larian's capital. The raven pin glinted on his cloak, a reminder that even one steeped in necromancy could be welcomed as a hero. He silently thanked Ormond for that gift, for believing light could be found even in darkness. Nightclaw fluttered onto his shoulder and nuzzled his ear. Zans chuckled. Ready to leave the party? Are we? The crow cawed as if to say about time. Zans took that as a sign. Slipping away from the revelry, he made his way down to the courtyard stables. There, the stable hands had his mule, affectionately nicknamed Ramsay by Jory, and a fresh horse laden with supplies, King Draven's parting provision for Zans's journey, prepared and waiting. He adjusted the saddle, gave a fond pat to the mule, and then led the animals through the gate, nodding at guards who saluted him respectfully. At the edge of the city, Zans paused. He looked back at the towers and walls, now golden in the afternoon sun. Farewell, Ebonfort, he murmured. Thank you for giving me back hope. With that, he set forth, the road homeward stretching before him. It took several days at a modest pace to reach the ruins of Aramor once more. Spring had fully arrived. Wildflowers carpeted the fields in colors of rebirth. When Zans walked among the charred remains of his village this time, it was with a lighter heart. He greeted each memory, painful or pleasant, like an old friend. At Ormond's makeshift grave beneath the oak tree, he stopped. The violet he'd planted there had miraculously taken root. Tiny purple blossoms now peeked through the stones. Zans felt a lump in his throat as Nightclaw hopped from his shoulder to perch atop the grave marker, cawing softly. We did it, Ormond, Zans said quietly. The Larian is free. The dead can rest again. A gentle breeze stirred the oak leaves as if in reply. He spent the day cleaning and tending the graves, humming one of Ormond's favorite tunes. By the time stars pricked the sky overhead, Aramor's ghost felt at peace. 41 Zans built a small campfire in what had been the village green and sat against the oak, Nightclaw snoozing beside him, Ramsay the mule cropping grass nearby. He opened Ormond's journal, filled now with new notes alongside the old. On the last page he wrote, The battle is won, but the journey continues. I carry the past with me, its lessons, its love, to shape a better future. Ormond, I hope to make you proud in how I use this gift. I will remember the fallen, guard the living, and walk in both light and shadow, so others do not have to. Zans Vara. He closed the worn book and looked up at the night sky. The moon shone bright, no longer darkened by an eclipse. It felt like a clean slate. As he drifted to sleep by the gentle crackle of the fire, Zans imagined the adventures yet to come. Perhaps he'd visit Eden in Highbrook and see how the town fared, or surprise Odelia at Greyport by popping into the archive unannounced. Maybe he'd take up Galen's offer to spar or drop by Crowford's rebuilt tavern for one of Jory's famed stews. Wherever the road led, he knew he wouldn't be alone. He had friends scattered like stars across the realm, and a faithful guardian in Nightclaw by his side. In time, songs would indeed be sung of the young necromancer who defied evil, some embellishing Nightclaw into a dragon, others giving Zans a 1,000-man army at Crowford. Zans might have chuckled hearing those, but he cared not for fame. All that mattered was that when darkness arose again, as it inevitably would somewhere, he would be there to meet it with staff and wit, and perhaps a bit of dark humor to keep him company through the night. In the quiet of that ruined village, Zans Vara, hero, wanderer, survivor, slept soundly, a small smile on his lips. For the first time since that dreadful night of blood and fire, his dreams were not haunted by screams or shadows, but filled with gentle voices and light. And as the embers of his campfire glowed under the vigilant stars, one chapter of his life ended and another began, full of promise beneath the endless sky.